Order. I have the honour to inform the House that a message has been received from the Senate informing this House that the Senate has passed the following bill with an amendment to which the concurrence of the House is desired. Bill C4, an act respecting certain affordability measures for Canadians, and another measure. Copies of the amendment are available at the table. Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Government orders, government bills. Senate beginning debate at second reading of Bill S2, an act to amend the Indian Act, new registration entitlements.
Ms. Golmasti, seconded by Ms. McKnight, moves that Bill S2, an act to amend the Indian Act, new registration entitlements, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Services. Debate. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to share my time with the member for Nunavut.
Order. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Member may proceed.
Kwekwe, Udlukut, Tansi, Wajakumshwe, bonjour, hello. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded and unrelinquished territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Indian Act of 1876 is a vestige of our colonial history and an attempt at complete assimilation of First Nations peoples. It sought to absorb our languages, our cultures, our governance structures, and ultimately our identity as First Nations peoples.
Through a process called enfranchisement, First Nations individuals were told that they would gain the basic right that other Canadians already had, but they simply had to give up who they were. They would have the capacity to vote, to own property, to practice law, and to become a doctor. Imagine that choice. I recognize that for many individuals who did choose enfranchisement, that it was truly not a choice at all. Imagine being told that your education, your profession, your ambition would cost you everything, your identity, your children's identity. I stand here to speak to Bill S2, a vital step towards addressing inequities in the Indian Act. It is worth remembering that before 1960, a First Nations woman such as myself would have never had the opportunity to sit in chamber as a member of Parliament, unless she first gave up her status. To serve in Canada's democracy, she would have been required to renounce legal recognition of who she was. That was the price of enfranchisement, participation in exchange for erasure. Now, for the first time, the Indigenous Minister of Indigenous Services is standing before you to advance reform on the very injustices of enfranchisement.
It is an honor to advance this work and move forward with Bill S2, a bill that specifically addresses these inequalities.
This legislation will restore entitlement to approximately 3,500 First Nations individuals and the descendants for those who gave it up or lost it. These are not just numbers on a page, Mr. President. There are more than 3,500 people, mothers, fathers, children, aunties, grandparents, who are all looking for the restoration of identity, dignity, and recognition, what they should have always had and what belongs to them. Across this country, thousands of First Nations individuals are waiting for enfranchisement decisions, waiting for their identity to be restored, waiting for their children to be recognized, waiting to be told by Canada what they have always known, that they belong. I've heard firsthand the impacts of enfranchisement on individuals, on their families, and on their communities. They have been clear that it is imperative to avoid delaying, that these need to be changed in the Indian Act. Their message is that they cannot and will not and should not be deterred and be continued the denial of their rightful entitlement any longer. Ce projet de
This bill gives First Nations peoples the power to remove themselves from the Indian register and regain control of their identity. It also removes outdated and offensive language from the Act regarding dependence, which is language inherited from colonial mindsets. And the bill also facilitates the reintegration of individuals, particularly women, into the First Nations band of their birth.
changes matter because they correct real harms and they bring people home. Bill S2 is a step in the right direction. I want to share and I want to state clearly that I recognize it does not address all inequities in the Indian Act. The second generation cutoff rule continues to harmfully erode entitlement over generations. Under the rule, if an entitled person marries someone who is not entitled, their children hold entitlement, but their future children do not, the second generation. This is a critical issue that must be addressed the right way. And I want to reiterate today to you that the question is not how we will do it, but it is when we will do it. We need to follow the lead of the community to ensure that the solutions we bring forward are not only supported by community, but have consensus of rights holders. C'est pourquoi nous avons
That is why we launched the collaborative process in November 2023 to address the second generation cutoff and voting thresholds under Article 10.
Many First Nations and organizations have developed proposals for solutions to these very issues, and through the Advisory Council, the proposals are presently being studied and evaluated based on legal viability. Their work is grounded in lived experience, community knowledge, and the realities of administering membership systems. Broad consultation, the second phase, will focus on these solutions and will be quickly launched in the next coming weeks. Advancing these amendments to S2 without meeting legal duty to consult would repeat outdated processes that unilaterally impose a legislative solution, not to mention further jeopardizing the status of thousands of individuals who have been waiting in limbo for S2 to pass in addressing enfranchisement.
I am firmly committed to ending the second generation cutoff rule, but we must respect this fundamental principle. Otherwise, we risk repeating the very wrongs we are seeking to right.
Getting this next step right is important. Legislative change without implementation readiness is not reconciliation. That is why addressing second generation cutoff requires a distinct legislative path forward, one that allows space for meaningful engagement with partners and also for government and communities to be prepared and supporting the changes that need to be made.
As we engage in this collaborative process on broader reforms with First Nations, we cannot ignore the urgency of those who are waiting right now. People who have applied for registration and have been denied because of enfranchisement. People whose parents or grandparents were forced to choose between their identity and the safety of their children.
Have lived in this system without recognition because the system was designed to erase their rights. The court decision in the Nicholas case found that certain registration provisions in the Indian Act violated the equality rights guaranteed under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The court gave Parliament a deadline to act. That April 2026 deadline is fast approaching. If we fail to pass the bill in this time, we risk leaving 35 people behind. We risk creating uncertainty for the families who have already endured too much. Further, we risk unequal application of the Indian Act across the country, and we risk allowing unconstitutional provisions to remain in force. This cannot happen. While I know and address this is a colonial policy, I want to ensure that the solutions that we bring forward are going to be based in further protecting the implementation process of what they are designed to do, to ensure that we bring forward equality. We want to also make sure that we are fighting to protect community and that they are leading the solutions, the true message of reconciliation. Experience grounds me and reminds me that this work is deeply personal, including for myself and for my own family. I carry that with me every time I stand in this place. Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity before us to correct a painful legacy, to restore the rights that were unjustly taken from thousands of people asked to make a simple choice, which perpetuated further harm. Bill S2 is necessary, it is urgent, it is a meaningful step towards justice. I urge for the passing of the bill as it was originally introduced to Parliament, so those who have waited far too long do not have to wait any longer.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable colleague for her speech and acknowledge the history that she spoke about and the history that she personally represents. Very proud to see that happen in my lifetime as well. Mr. Speaker, in this House, we take legislation that affects First Nations on multiple issues. Earlier in this Parliament, we talked about things like C5, we debated an Alberta MOU, and in that time, First Nations were complaining that there wasn't any consultation with them. On this one, the opposite is happening, where First Nations are saying we don't need consultation anymore to do the right thing to end discrimination in the Indian Act. Can the minister address that double standard on why they're delaying things to end sex discrimination, but on other things they do consultation?
The honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague for his question. I must, address that Bill S2 in its original form was intended to look at enfranchisement, one of the challenges with the Indian Act. And I can, answer and respond that there are many, many cases of discrimination under the Indian Act. I am looking for a solution that is going to ensure we are able to reach consensus on what solution truly is. In this case, the amendments that are put forward are looking to implement a one-parent solution, but is that truly the only solution that we can bring forward? Is it blood quantum? Is it one-parent rule? Or is it alternatives? We should challenge ourselves to do more and to allow community to be able to maintain jurisdiction over their lists and make decisions for themselves.
And comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honourable député de Nunavut.
And I thank the minister for her important presentation. I do want to ask the minister if she supports the amendments that were made by the Senate Committee on this study. They made very important amendments that would help to equalize First Nations rights so that they're on par with Canadian rights.
The honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for the important question. The intention of Bill S2, once again, was to address the enfranchisement and the return of 3,500 people. This is how the bill was framed. While I want to commend the Senate for the work that they do, the important history of speaking to this file and the discrimination that the Indian Act has in place, I also want to ensure that it is clear with my colleagues that we have launched a collaborative process that is engaging with community, asking them to submit proposals that are presently being looked at for legal risk, legal validity, to ensure the solutions we bring forward are going to be upheld and truly meet the standard of what a solution should be for community. While we are doing this consultation process, it is imperative that their voice be part of the solution building well beyond what is offered in the amendments.
Questions et commentaires. L'honourable député de Berthier.
The honourable member for Berthier-Maskinonge. Well, the act, because even the name of the act doesn't work anymore, so there are things that we can change. Should we not go further in terms of the recognition of the rights of these nations and having a real partnership nation to nation, which I hope we'll be able to do under a sovereign Quebec, but will Canada undertake this work?
Merci à mon collègue.
I'd like to thank my colleague for asking this question. Well, honestly, this is one of the biggest challenges as I see in my role as the Minister of Indigenous Services. I have to work with an act that is really discriminatory vis-a-vis the Indigenous peoples of Canada. That is why, in order to find solutions, we will adopt an approach that will be based on the directives I receive from the communities, because this is the main importance of including First Nations, so that we make sure that the solutions are for them and by them.
Secretary of State, Rural Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to commend the Minister for her phenomenal leadership in this regard. It gives me a great pleasure to be in the Assembly as I listen to her mark this day with a very, very important speech, and something that I think we all could be proud of as Canadians. My question to the Minister is, as we celebrate this step, there are many steps forward. What's next on the agenda as she embarks on this bold new journey?
The Honourable Member, Minister, a very brief response.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague for his question and his support. There is much work left to be done in terms of the bill itself. I'm looking forward to see the debate and the process that will be undertaken. This is imperative work. I believe that the voice of leadership across this country, locally elected chief and councils, must participate and bring forward the solutions that they're looking for. And as I said, should go beyond the scope of what these amendments are offering.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
I would like to thank the Minister for sharing her time with me on this important bill, S2, to amend the Indian Act. Bill C-38 from the last Parliament was a bill that I could not support at the time because of the inequities that First Nations would continue to have. The NDP supports the Senate amendments and hope that this bill will pass quickly. It is about time to finally make sure First Nations women and children can get the justice they deserve. I thank the Indian Act Sex Discrimination Working Group for their tireless work and advocacy. They are role models of what it means to never give up. The working group consists of Sharon McIver, Jeanette Corbière-Lavelle, Cora Maguire-Siret, Marjolaine Etienne, Kupi, Judy Wilson, Dr. Pamela Palmater, Don Lavelle Havard, Dr. Gwen Brodsky, Mary Eberts, and Sheila Day. In their work, they remind us of the National Inquiry for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report in 2019, where the Call for Justice 1.2v calls on Canada to eliminate gender discrimination in the Indian Act. It is clear the Liberal agenda to delay the passage of S2 with the Senate amendments. They are using the need to consult on the how and the range of potential pathways that need to be consulted on. I heard during the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee meeting in February when Laurie Doran, the Director General for Indian Affairs, appeared at that committee. Some of the work that has occurred to fix the discrimination in the Indian Act include and are not limited to the following. Number one, Bill C-38 tabled in the 44th Parliament. Indigenous Services Canada had in 2023 reported that they were beginning a co-development consultation process to address the second generation cutoff. Number three, the Assembly of First Nations had provided a brief in 2020 including, quote, enfranchisement had an impact on all subsequent generations of people. It did not matter if an individual was voluntarily or involuntarily enfranchised. Subsequent generations could not appear on banned lists or on the Indian register as status Indians, end quote. Number four, Nicholas v. Canada in 2011, which required the tabling of Bill C-38. Number 5, S3's final report to Parliament in December 2020. Number 6, amendments to the Indian Act, including C31 in 1985, C3 in 2010, and S3 in 2017. I remind Parliament that these amendments, like C38, were only in responses to court cases against the federal government. I am struck by the stark contrast of pace this Liberal government chooses to make depending on whether they respect Indigenous peoples' rights. Very clearly, we see the contrast in how this Liberal government fast-tracked Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act. C-5 became enshrined in Canadian law in record time. It received royal assent on June 26, 2025, only 1 year and 2 months after the election. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit all called for the federal government to slow down to give Indigenous peoples time to understand the potential impact of C-5. The Liberals ignored these calls and used House procedures to ensure a quick passage. They violated the rights of Indigenous peoples as required under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They did not receive the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. Now, in S2, the Liberals want to do consultations on how to remedy this issue, stating there are a range of potential pathways. All of a sudden, they worry about whether S2 would be charter compliant. The Assembly of First Nations support S2. In fact, they call upon the federal government to, quote, immediately and without delay end any and all sex and race-based discrimination in the Indian Act, end quote, in their December 2025 motion in response to S2. The delay tactics are so clear to Indigenous peoples that we have responses like the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, who have stated they will not participate in the consultations on second-generation cutoff. They explain that, quote, the consultation process is a clear conflation of status, membership, citizenship, and self-government, which are all separate legal issues, end quote. The Chiefs of Ontario supports the amendment stated in the media that, quote, aim to address its long-standing inequities and remove discriminatory language that should never have existed, end quote. They further call on the federal government, quote, to work directly with First Nations to create a framework that allows them to fully control their own membership, free from restrictive federal oversight, with decisions recognized as authoritative for all purposes, end quote. Instead, the Liberals are opting to consult on how to remedy the issue of second-generation cutoff. They have stated the so-called concerns to the huge increase of potential members that would happen if S2 passed. Leading experts like Dr. Pam Palmater stated at the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee that, quote, there have been no less than 10 Supreme Court of Canada cases that said you can't use consultation as a delay. You can't use financial costs by the federal government. None of these excuses are at play. They also say that you cannot use an incremental approach to get rid of Section 15 discrimination. That's exactly what this is. Why are they doing it? Well, it's unjust enrichment on Canada's part, because the longer they delay making these amendments, the less money they have to spend on people who should rightfully be included, and then they insulate themselves from liability with non-liability clauses, and that's wrong. The other thing I think that's really important to remember is that millions of people aren't going to be added. In fact, the estimates are 7,500 people a year divided over 630 First Nations. We all know that with every single amendment, millions were never added. If it was It was 130,000 for Bill C-31, 38,000 for Bill C-3, and Bill S-3 is 88,000 so far, divided among 630 First Nations, end quote. The Government of Canada can make substantial changes to the Indian Act to end discrimination, but they choose to hide behind future consultations and small legislative steps to say they are making progress. The NDP call upon the Liberals to end their delay tactics. I call on them to use the same pace they did in C5 to expedite the passage of this bill and ensure that discussions towards First Nations achieving their inherent jurisdiction over citizenship and membership.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations.
Yes, I thank the member opposite for her speech, and I think that everyone can agree that the Indian Act has challenges. The Indian Act has created discrimination, and that we need to move beyond the second generation cutoff. But there's no consensus out there on what the solution is. My thoughts go towards, and my question for the member opposite is, if there is a community out there who don't want these amendments, if there is a community out there who wants something else, if there's a community who wants to do it themselves without Parliament and Senate telling them how to run their communities, should we force this on them? Should they not be given the option to opt into something as opposed to Senate or this Parliament saying, we know what's best for your community?
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
And I thank the member for his question. I do remind him that those kinds of questions should have been asked when they were expediting Bill C-5. They did not take into consideration the fact that there were different solutions and different things that were requested of different First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, yet they were able to expedite the passing of C-5, and if they can do that with that bill, they should be able to do that with the added amendments of S2.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
I thank the honourable member for her dialogue today. My question is, Indigenous Services covers Inuit, Métis, and First Nations in particular. It's my understanding that Inuit people have no second-generation cutoff rule. Métis people have no second-generation cutoff rule, but First Nations do. Can she reflect on the injustices under that ministry and that definition on how this cannot continue to go forward?
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
I thank the member for his important question. It's definitely very obvious that there's been ways that the federal government has used its colonial efforts to divide and conquer the Indigenous peoples, be it First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and we need to make sure that as Indigenous peoples that we stand in solidarity to make sure that these injustices, like the second generation cutoff, are addressed.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for her statement. I'll reiterate the question I asked of the Minister. Of course, we are in favour of the change proposed, but to us, it is timid. It's a timid approach, given this legislation that is still sexist and discriminatory. Does she not believe that there needs to be a next step to really establish a nation-to-nation partnership, which I hope we managed to do with Québec Souverain? I would like to know her opinion on this and what the next steps should be.
And I agree with the line of questioning with the member that it doesn't go far enough, that First Nations do need to achieve their inherent jurisdiction over citizenship and membership. That dialogue needs to go further, and making sure that we can have the swift passage of S2 with the Senate amendments can help push that agenda forward.
And I see the member from Sandwich Gulf Islands has been waiting patiently. The Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Island.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for Nunavut. Certainly, this legislation needs the amendments from the Senate. S2 must include that we deal with the first generation cutoff. I want to ask her if she heard an answer when she asked the minister if the government was prepared to support the Senate amendments so this can be passed expeditiously. I'm still not certain. I asked the honourable member for Nunavut.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
I do thank the member for her question. I did not hear a favorable answer, unfortunately, and I think that's what our fight will end up being, is to make sure that those Senate amendments are included in S2, particularly because, for example, in C38, there was a provision where First Nations who experienced discrimination would be disallowed from seeking restitution, and the S2, the Senate amendments to S2 would propose to fix those kinds of injustices.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Thank you. I chose to come to Ottawa to do right by my constituents, to do right by our country and all its people as defined by Treaty 6, to do right by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for all Canadians, including Canada's First Nations people. Bill S2 brings justice to First Nations people by helping to end discrimination that primarily affects First Nations women and children. The Senate has rightfully challenged the 45th Parliament of Canada to make history with this bill by 1, addressing the Nicholas decision, 2, ending the second-generation cutoff now. After some reflection, I and my fellow Conservatives are prepared to meet the challenge of the Senate to address the Nicholas decision and end the second-generation cutoff rule now during this Parliament. With respect, I hear the indecisiveness on the other side of the House when it comes to this bill introduced by the Liberals themselves. I want to respond to some of their concerns raised and the notions presented. 1, consultation. Of course, consultation is important and is best practice, but First Nations have felt they've already been consulted on this for decades. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs recently said, we cannot support yet another consultation process on how to end the second-generation cutoff when through decades of research, court cases, collaboration, and engagement, and studies, you are aware that the sex and race-based discrimination violates Section 15 of the Charter and Section 35 rights. Sharon McIver, a Cookham champion in the Indians Act Sex Discrimination Working Group, recently wrote the government to say, in light of the Senate's amendments, the justification for further consultation is extremely unclear. It seems to be a delay tactic. But the consultation process is also conflating and confusing status, membership, citizenship, and self-government, which are all separate legal issues. And I myself, being a former chief, status Indian, and MP, have heard time and time again from coast to coast to coast, the second-generation cutoff has been breaking families up since 1985 and needs to end yesterday. I also challenge the Liberals to be more principled when it comes to consultation in their loose application of the Mikisew versus Canada 2018 decision principles. How is it the Liberals can justify further delay through consultation in ending the second-generation cutoff on S2, but do not consult before passing bills in this Parliament like C5 and the Alberta MOU? The Minister has expressed concerns from chiefs and communities on how this affects membership and costs to First Nations. I acknowledge the concerns of chiefs on shortcomings when it comes to housing, education, child welfare, water, and infrastructure. Those issues also need systematic fixes, but outside this legislation. We must not let perfect get in the way of progress. In addition, the projected numbers of for this bill, the government says itself, this bill will add approximately 22,000 people in the first year to the Status Indian Registry, and approximately 7,000 to 8,000 net new per year for the next 30 to 40 years. The direct costs are those basic social supports that ISE covers, which are projected to be approximately $50 million on a $25 billion budget. This pales in comparison to the billions spent and the numbers added by the Liberal mismanagement of immigration over the last decade. Finally, the legalities of this. It has never been the case that Canada has voluntarily amended the Indian Registry provisions after conducting nationwide consultations. In Friend versus Alberta 1998, the decision says groups that have historically been the target of discrimination cannot be expected to wait patiently for the protection of their human dignity and equal rights while the governments move forward to reform one step at a time. Failing to quickly act is a denial of charter rights. If the infringement of the rights and the freedoms of these groups is permitted to persist while the government failed to pursue equality diligently, then the guarantees of the charter will be reduced to little more than empty words. Possibly out of fear of risk, the government chooses to focus on excuses. But the risks do not do nothing. The risk of doing nothing is greater. We have a chance now to change the narrative. The government can be proactive in reconciliation by doing the right thing now, before going through long, costly litigation again to end sex discrimination in the Indian Act. As Conservatives, we want to help lead a new chapter in reconciliation. We are proud to be an opposition that challenges the government to meet higher standards. That's the power of Parliament and its relationship with First Nations peoples. It is a relationship that can be one of the defining aspects that shows that this House can work together rather than being defined by political differences. Just yesterday, I was proud to sit in this House and witness my Conservative colleague from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, I got to ask for unanimous consent to share time with him.
Yes, is there consent to split the time? Agreed and so ordered. The honourable member may resume.
Was supported with unanimous consent of all parties in the House to amend the Criminal Code to end coerced and forced sterilization, which unfortunately disproportionately affects Indigenous women and girls. A powerful moment between all parties that brings justice and hope for the future. Furthermore, the 45th Parliament is unique. In 2025, Canada helped elect the first Indigenous woman as Indigenous Services Minister, and I'm proud to be asked by our Conservative leader to sit as the shadow ISC Minister. I respectfully challenge the Minister and offer my help and advice to work for the work necessary to help end discrimination against women and children and end the second-generation cutoff in that work. I give thanks for my fellow Conservatives for giving me the ability to issue that challenge, a challenge rooted in aligning First Nation and Conservative values to end discrimination and align values such as self-determination and self-responsibility, lower government control of the people, ensuring the protection of traditions and transmitting those traditions down through generations, and protection of the Institute of Family and keeping families together. Conservative values and Indigenous values can align. And that's what this is ultimately about, Mr. Speaker, keeping families together. Since the Senate initiated this challenge, I have heard from some of the toughest stories. If the government is truly about nation-to-nation and reconciliation, they will act to respond to these stories by getting rid of the second-generation cutoff and honoring the Nicholas decision. Stories like how a chief from Manitoba raises her daughter with language, with culture, and ceremony, but because of the second-generation cutoff, the chief's daughter is systematically not a First Nations person. Who is the government to uphold the law to tell the chief that their daughter is less than others in her own family? This is certainly not reconciliation, and this is not nation-to-nation. We've heard from an uncle who signed a nephew's birth certificate so that the child did not have to be ostracized from their own community. We heard from a Kukum who lives on reserve and is transitioning to her spirit journey and is not able to pass on her life's belongings and her home to her children and grandchildren. We heard from First Nations entrepreneurs, an owner who will be forced to sell his business to a band in order to keep it Indigenous owned because his daughter is non-status. We listened to the AFN Youth Council speak on how they are not leaders of tomorrow, they are leaders of today to address the government on this issue because they will ultimately not be a part of seeing whole First Nations communities and families go extinct in their lifetime. There is a longer-term principled fix here, Mr. Speaker. The ISC Minister and my own community have found it. Membership and family should be defined by the First Nations themselves, not Ottawa. Nearly half of First Nations have found this solution, and the government should focus its efforts on capacity to facilitate First Nations to move from Section 11 to Section 10 bans or modern self-government agreements, self-determining agreements with the federal government. And the First Nations need to meet Canada halfway as well, to make this a priority and put in the work to define their own membership laws. That was the attitude when I was chief, and the attitude I carry as a Conservative still to this day as a member of Parliament. First Nations are the masters of their own destiny, not Ottawa. Ottawa needs to focus less on political ISC programs and more on systematic empowering of Indigenous peoples. I'm proud to say this is also the guiding principle of our Conservative leader and team when it comes to Indigenous Canada relationships. I think all members of this House know that to be true, but this House has to be better at acting on that principle. I'm finding the balance of being an MP, a First Nation status person. When my time here is done, I cannot look back and say, I did nothing to speak and act against the extinction of First Nations people, which by some accounts will peak in approximately 30 years. I'm here to honor the principle of treaty that Canadians and First Nations people will work together as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. I challenge Liberals not to use delay tactics when it is politically convenient, show leadership, and put the work in to pass S2 that honors the Nichols decision, gets rid of the second-generation cutoff expediently during this Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague for his commentary today, and I want to also acknowledge and echo the challenges of being a First Nations person in doing this critical work. We know that this bill has been put forward as something that is going to address enfranchisement as part of the Indian Act. I'd like to ask my colleague the question of if you are truly going to support the process of community having jurisdiction and authority of defining membership and status, Does my colleague support and create the space needed for community to do that work internally and have authority over choosing procedure? Or will my colleagues support amendments that will eliminate the opportunity for them to do so?
The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Question. Ultimately, as I said, the decisions and the destiny of where First Nations people, Indigenous people lie in their own communities, I agree with that principle. But I also think this is, again, a delay tactic from the Liberals. And quite frankly, it's not consistent with their other positions when it comes to non-consultations on C5 and Alberta MOUs. So right now, I think First Nations have that opportunity. The amendments contemplate a one-year transition period, and there's more than ample opportunity and resources for First Nations to do the right thing, which they want to do, to move to their own membership definitions.
Questions and comments? Question commentator on Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois, Celebrate-Soulange Huntingdon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to commend my colleague for her question. I think the House is relatively unanimous in our support for S2, but I would still like to hear him speak about whether it would be possible to go a little bit farther and do more to amend the Indian Act. My colleague was saying that the Indian Act even is repulsive when you look at the name. So does my colleague think that more should be done to move forward our relationship with First Nations?
Ultimately, the Indian Act needs to be dispelled, but it's First Nations that got to be the primary driver of that. I agree with my colleague in that regard. For this legislation, I accept the amendments on behalf that the Senate made. And again, we can't let perfect get in the way of progress. The Indian Act is still going to be generations and decades ahead at different paces for First Nations communities. But ultimately, what we're talking about here today is the federal government relationship, specifically status individuals, and that government can lead on that to get rid of it today and get rid of discrimination.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, and thank my honourable colleague who's in my neighbouring riding, and he'll be well aware of the history of the Michelle Band in Sturgeon County, one of the only First Nations in Canada that was forcibly enfranchised. And I'm wondering if he can talk about the impact that this legislation will have on First Nations peoples like those in the Michelle Band, and how we can do a better job of creating reconciliation to recognize First Nations status in this country. Thank you.
Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, I thank my colleague for his question. And ultimately, the original version of this bill is C-38 through the Nicholas decision, and affects primarily the Michelle Band in particular, of over 3,000 people approximately. I think the Liberals are phrasing this as one or the other. We can have both, and we can make history today. You know, the government has traditionally gone through litigation to change the Indian Act. This time they can redefine reconciliation and be proactive to stay out of long, costly court cases and do both to honor Michelle Band, but also get rid of the second generation cutoff for generations to come today.
Questions, comments? The honourable member for Nunavut in about 30 seconds.
Very quickly, if the member could share with us whether the Conservatives will support the amendments that were made by the Senate. The
honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
The Conservatives support the amendments made by the Senate.
Resuming debate, a reprise du débat, the honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It is a pleasure, as always, to rise and speak in this House, but today it's on S2, an act to amend the Indian Act, legislation that makes an important step toward correcting long-standing discrimination in the registration provisions of the Indian Act. And first, before I get into the meat of my speech, I'd like to thank and congratulate my colleague, the member from Edmonton Northwest, on his inspiring words today. He had a great speech, and he provides great leadership in our caucus on many issues, including the Indigenous file, and it's a pleasure to work with him and many others as we move forward. So at its heart, Bill S2 is about justice. It's about equality. It's about ensuring that First Nations families are no longer divided by outdated rules that have no place in a modern charter-compliant Canada. Now, it's important to note that Bill S2 has two main parts. The first is dealing with enfranchisement. So it's meant that in the past, First Nations women have been less able than First Nations men, among others, to pass on their status to their children and grandchildren. It's meant that families have been separated, unfortunately, by bureaucracy. It's meant that parents are unable to pass on their identity, their rights, their homes, and their traditions. It also works to correct wrongs in terms of those having to give up their status to avoid such things as fighting for Canada in a conflict or avoiding the horrors that Canada has inflicted, such as the 60s Stoop, among many, many, many others. So it moves us towards a simple and fair principle that First Nations women and men have the same ability to pass on their status to their children. And Conservatives supported that main piece of legislation in a previous parliament, and we still do to this day. Now, the second part, that's the amendments that were made in the Senate, talk about eliminating the second generation cutoff, because equality under the law is not negotiable. And we have heard from many First Nation families who have spent years and even decades navigating complex registration rules. Families who feel their line is coming to an end, not because of their choices, but because of a technical formula imposed by government. The second generation cutoff was introduced in 1995 through Bill C-31. It applied not only to those born after April of that year, but over time its effect has been clear. It does not simply manage registration, it legislates the gradual disappearance of status Indians. Some have called this an administrative policy, but for families facing the end of their legal identity, this is not administrative, it is existential. Bill S-2 is not a one-drop rule. It does not open the door to distant or speculative claims. It applies to the children and grandchildren of current status holders, peoples whose connection to their communities is real, recent, and meaningful. Removing the cutoff also allows families to pass on homes on reserve, family businesses, traditional rights. It allows parents to pass on not only legal recognition, but culture, language, and livelihoods. This is about survival, not expansion. The bill also aligns the transmission of First Nation status with a principle that Canadians already understood. In Canada, citizenship is passed on through one parent. Inuit Métis recognition follows a similar logic. The one-parent rule reflects how identity is carried forward in families. Bill S-2 restores that same principle for First Nations fairly and equally for both men and women. It goes beyond what the courts have required. The Nicholas decision addressed only individuals who enfranchised personally. Bill S-2 and its predecessor extend fairness to those entire bands who were enfranchised, ensuring no community is left behind. Let us also remember what enfranchisement meant. First Nations people were forced to give up their status simply to vote, to own property, or to access basic rights. Today, we are still repairing the consequences of those policies. And some have raised concerns about numbers and costs, so let us look at the facts. Stats Canada estimates between 200,000 and 320,000 people may become entitled over the next 40 years. That's roughly 5 to 7,500 people a year. I should say 5,000 to 7,500 people per year after that initial phase. Spread across more than 630 First Nations, that's about a dozen people per community per year. This is not a flood. It is a gradual and manageable restoration of rights. We also know from previous legislation that projected uptake is rarely reached. Past reforms saw far less registrations that were expected. In some cases, less than 12% of eligible individuals actually registered. Most new registrants will live in urban areas and continue their existing lives. The Parliamentary Budget Officer previously found that virtually none moved into reserve after earlier reforms. The estimated cost, about $2,000 per registrant per year, which would represent only about 2.5% of Indigenous Services Canada's operating budget over time. To put this in perspective, Canada welcomes more than 300,000 newcomers each year and records hundreds of thousands of births annually. Compared to that, the number of new registrants under Bill S-2 is modest. And most importantly, cost cannot be used to justify denying charter equality rights. There are no misconceptions about tax advantages and benefits. The reality is, tax exemptions largely apply to on-reserve and are rooted in pre-Confederation protections to preserve First Nations economic capacity. Income tax exemptions apply only to those who live and work on reserve. Mainly, and in many cases, and commonly cited benefits are limited to not apply in urban settings. So this legislation is not about special treatment, it's about equal treatment. Others have raised concerns about fishing rights or community resources, but food, social, and ceremonial fisheries are collective rights administered by First Nations governments. The modest increase in membership expected under this bill will not create sudden or disruptive changes. What would be disruptive, Speaker, is allowing the current rules to continue. Because if the second generation cutoff remains, the long-term outcome is clear. Fewer and fewer status Indians in each generation. And in some regions, legal status could disappear entirely within decades. This is not reconciliation. This is legislated extinction. This legislation also reflects a long tradition of expanding rights in Canada. Conservative governments have supported major equality measures, including the restoration of status through Bills C-31 and C-3, the extension of voting rights to First Nations peoples in 1960, the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Employment Equity Act, and the Canadian Multiculturalism Act. Time and time again, when Canada has faced a choice between maintaining outdated systems and improving equality and expanding it, we have chosen to expand and improve equality. Bill S2, of course, continues that tradition. There's also a practical consideration. Passing this legislation now keeps the Indian Act compliant with the Charter and reduces the need for ongoing litigation. Instead of waiting to be taken to court again and again, Parliament can now act proactively to fix discrimination where it exists. The proposed one-year implementation period, I believe, and many on this side believe it's reasonable. It will allow Indigenous Services Canada to address technical issues and improve processing capacity, including reducing the current backlog of more than 12,000 applications. And at the same time, we support First Nations authority to develop and manage their own membership codes. Status under the Indian Act and band membership are distinct, and communities must remain and retain that ability to define their own belonging. At its core, Bill C-2 is not about numbers, budgets, or administrative systems. It's about families. It's about a mother who is unable to pass along the status to her child. It's about an angler who can't take their child onto the boat because that child lacks status. It's about grandparents who fear their legal identity will end with the next generation. For those families, this legislation matters deeply, and for them, this is the difference between disappearance and continuity. Status Indians represent less than 5% of Canada's total population, but equality is not determined by numbers. Rights are not reserved for majorities. Justice does not depend on scale. If we believe in reconciliation, if we believe in equality between men and women, and if we believe that First Nations identity should not be legislated out of existence, then this path forward is clear. Bill S2 restores fairness, it strengthens families, it aligns the law with the Charter, and it helps to ensure First Nations identity can be carried forward to future generations. And I urge all members in this House to support Bill S2 and take this important step toward justice, equality, and reconciliation. Thank you, Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire, the Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for his commentary today. Although I must admit that I'm quite surprised that his support seems to be indicative that he is willing to support the bill only if members remain in urban areas, and that this is equal treatment of First Nations people. So I am not sure if I truly can support the position and reasoning that he's bringing forward. If communities accept this process, are they not continuing to support the further discrimination of the Indian Act because they remain out of territory or out of community? I want to understand how do they intend to provide the opportunity to First Nations community to develop status and membership and authority of their members who reside off community, which this bill does not offer.
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you, Speaker. Actually, I I don't think the minister heard exactly what I said, because that's not exactly what I said. That's not even close to what I said. It was in the context, that description was in the context that in the vast majority of cases, status, as they're called in the Act, status Indians, live off reserve. I was making that link that some choose to return home, but in the scale that it would happen in a manageable fashion, the nations themselves would have time and capacity to prepare for those wanting and desiring to move home. And I think that's something we all consent. So I think the minister clearly misheard me, because that's not what I said at all.
The Honourable Member for Côte Nord, Kawawa-Chikamach, Natasanen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank my colleague whom I sit with on the INAN committee for his speech. I have a question for him. Currently, at the committee, there is a study on registration rights. It's a very general study, but it looks at how the government will carry out a consultation to close certain legal voids that still exist in the current bill, legal voids concerning registration. Now, I get the sense that our work might lead to a report or even a reference to the Supreme Court to ask the government to impose on the government the obligation to solve these problems through legislation. Is my colleague worried that if S2 is not passed, it will leave an empty hole in the legal system?
From the block for her question. It's good to see her on the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee once again. It's always a pleasure to work with her, and of course her knowledge and leadership on the file. Yes, as my colleague from Edmonton Northwest pointed out, the government likes to choose when consultation works for them and what it doesn't. I think, as the member from Edmonton pointed out, there is a path forward. Nations that are ready are willing to step up and take this on. And Indigenous Services itself, the department, I know the government wants to seems to want to buy more time for the department to figure all this out, but there is capacity within the department. There just has to be leadership on the political level, and we hope the Liberal government takes that.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
For his speech. And my question to him is, since I've become here as a new member of Parliament, I've witnessed ISC over the last number of years go from 4,000 to 8,000 employees. I've seen ISC programs double, and the results for First Nations and Indigenous peoples come down. Can you reflect on how focusing on empowerment through root causes is better than focusing on expanding budgets for government bureaucracy and bloated programs?
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to my friend from Edmonton Northwest, and again for his leadership on this file. Yeah, absolutely correct. We brought up many times in committee and in this House about how the expansive role ISC has taken from a mere, well, I can't say a mere, 4,000 or so employees when the split happened between ISC and CERNAC, and all the way to 8,000 employees, still counting, but yet the outcomes, the actual results in community have gotten worse. And that is something we continue to press on this side of the House, that if the increase in spending is happening, which we support, we want to see results be equal to that spending, and right now this government has not done that.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre, about 30 seconds.
Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to hear that the Conservatives will be supporting the amendments coming out of Senate, and I'm shocked that the Liberals are so adamant to keep sexism in the Indian Act. That's going to result in the extinction of First Nations people. As a First Nations woman, I'm very offended. I'm wondering what led the Conservatives to take the right position in this instance to ensure that to respect First Nations people and our rights.
Member, about 15 seconds.
Well, thank you very much. I think there's a long history of Conservatives supporting progress on with Indigenous people and repairing that relationship that has been broken over 100 years. It was also John Diefenbaker, a Conservative Prime Minister, that returned voting that was wrongly taken by the Liberal government at the time under Laurier. So there's many instances of showing Conservative leadership.
Statements by members. Déclaration de député. Député de Hull-Aylmer.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's a Black History Month this week. I had a great meeting with a group of students, and one of the students asked me a question if I had already faced racism and how I had overcome.
On one occasion, I've been confronted with the N-word, and in the moment, I find it bewildering. After all, what does a racist want me to do? My skin is brown. I can't change that. I don't want to change that. To the racist, this is not a me problem. This is a you problem. You don't like black people? Good luck with that. You might want to seek some help because your life is going to be needlessly painful if you can't accept the reality of my skin, or that the sky is blue, or that the sun always rises in the east. Le février est le mois pour célébrer.
February is the month to celebrate who we are, our presence and our contributions that continue. So happy Black History Month, Mr. Speaker, to all my colleagues here in the chamber.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a very special member of our community, Linda Jean Lorraine Pace. On January 3rd, God welcomed Linda home. She leaves behind 3 loving children and a legacy of service, love, and a true example of what it means to be a Proverbs 31 woman. Linda's mark on our community will never be forgotten. She was heavily involved with the Missions Thrift Store in Cobourg, volunteered at the Church on the Hill, the Coventry Relief Kitchen in Coburn, and the Salvation Army. Mr. Speaker, I know Linda's family will not be the only ones that miss her. Her impact on the community was deep and profound. We send our best wishes to the Pace family, and we remember Linda, who exemplified what Proverbs said, clothed in strength and dignity, and laugh without fear of the future. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, the countdown is on. In just over a week, the Arctic Winter Games are returning to Whitehorse. For over 50 years, this event has been a premier athletic stage for circumpolar youth. With over 4,000 athletes, coaches, support staff, and volunteers already gearing up, the Yukon is set to continue this proud legacy. This Games is not just about medals, it's competing together, trading pins and gear, and showcasing Northern grit. In Arctic sports, athletes will test their limits in traditional events like the 1-foot high kick and the knuckle hop, feats of incredible endurance passed down through generations. And don't miss the cultural gala. Here, youth from Nunavut to Alaska to Sapmi will share performances from traditional drumming and throat singing to modern dance. Whether on wrestling mats or on the gala stage, our young ambassadors will proudly show off the North. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, join me in cheering on what promises to be a fantastic Arctic Winter Games, and in thanking all the volunteers and organizers who are showing the world what we're made of. Thank you, and go Team Yukon Go.
The Honourable Member for Bow River.
Mr. Speaker, Head, Heart, Health and Hands is the 4-H pledge. On March 14th, I'll be attending the South 4-H Region's annual communications event in Alberta, which will host approximately 100 young speakers. I joined 4-H when I was 9 years old, and it was there that I learned to stand on my own 2 feet, to speak with confidence, and to work hard for my neighbors. It was there that I first lived the motto that still guides me today, learn to do by doing. 4-H provides youth with a structured, hands-on environment where character is built the old-fashioned way. Young people roll up their sleeves and take on real responsibility. Each year they develop a project that may focus on life skills or raising livestock. They develop skills in the trades, public speaking, leadership, teamwork, parliamentary procedure, and community service. They serve their communities and take pride in the job well done, and in doing so, 4-H prepares young people for whatever path they choose. Mr. Speaker, I encourage all members of this House to recognize and celebrate the tremendous work of 4-H and the volunteers who make it possible in Alberta, Canada, and around the world.
The Honourable Member for Orleans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 16th to the 24th of February, we congratulated the Scout Week, which took place, and Scouting a Pride That Unites Us was the motto. In Canada, Francophone Scouting brings together 10,000 young people and 3,700 volunteers, a dynamic community that brings adventure to life. In my riding, the 24th Orleans Scout Group has 104 exceptional young people recognized for their bravery, team spirit, and exemplary community involvement. Thank you to those who are keeping this Francophone movement alive. And Mr. Speaker, I will finish by applauding our Canadian athletes, which did us proud at the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics. And I would like to congratulate our athletes from the National Capital Region and especially the pride of Orleans, Ivani Blondin, for her 2 medals in speed skating. Ivani.
Personally shared with you, we are so proud of your victory.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour the life of a great man, Ron Russell. Ron was a farmer and a founder of AgWest Equipment in Portage la Prairie, building a brand and reputation across Western Canada for quality products and great service. He loved agriculture, making deals and supporting his community. More importantly, Ron was a husband, father, grandfather, friend, mentor, and a man whose presence left a lasting impression on everyone fortunate enough to know him. He was always quick with a smile, and that booming laugh of his was always just a split second away. You couldn't help but smile when you were around Ron. Ron saw every interaction as a chance to make a friend, of which he collected an uncountable number across North America who will miss him dearly. To his wife Joan, son Murray, daughter Denise, and her husband Yuri, his sisters, nieces, and nephews, and his grandchildren whom he adored, may you be blessed with strength from the memories of the way he lived, and grateful for the many years we got with him, even through his long battle with cancer. We'll miss you. Rest easy, Uncle Ron.
The honourable member for Scarborough Centre, Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we observe the blessed month of Ramadan, I rise to reflect on its enduring values of compassion, self-discipline, and service to the others. Ramadan is a time when Muslims recommit to justice, generosity, and care for the vulnerable, principles that speak to the best of our shared humanity. Yet this month also arrives as millions around the world endure profound hardship. We cannot ignore the suffering of the Palestinian people who continue to face violence, displacement, and persecution in the West Bank and Gaza. As families there struggle for safety, dignity, and hope, Ramadan reminds us that indifference is not an option. At its heart, Ramadan calls us to reflection, empathy, and moral responsibility. It urges us to listen to the oppressed, stand with those in pain, and renew our commitment to human dignity. May this holy month inspire compassion in our words and conscience in our actions. Thank you.
The honourable member for Riding Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize an outstanding individual from the community of St. Rose, Manitoba. Dr. David O'Hagan has dedicated 40 remarkable years to serving the people of St. Rose and the surrounding area as a physician. Originally from South Africa, Dr. O'Hagan chose rural Manitoba as his home, and he has never looked back. It's no secret that finding a doctor willing to plant roots in rural Canada is tough. Too many small towns watch as their physicians come and go. But Dr. O'Hagan didn't just stay. He fell in love with his community, raised his family there, and made St. Rose his life's work. In rural Canada, a physician who stays is not just a doctor. They become a pillar to the entire community. And Dr. O'Hagan and his wife Bonnie became that pillar, caring for generations of families with dedication and compassion. I ask all members to join me in thanking Dr. David O'Hagan for his outstanding 40 years of service.
The honourable member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, on February 16th, we were saddened to learn the passing of Thomas de Coninck, an internationally renowned philosopher and a pillar of philosophy education at Laval University. Thomas de Coninck will, of course, be remembered as the inspiration for Saint-Exupéry's character in The Little Prince, but for students who knew him, like myself, the legend he forged lies elsewhere. He left a lasting impression on many generations of students because for us he was the one who awakened our desire to learn, who nurtured our critical thinking and our love of culture in all of its forms. Professor de Coninck knew how to convey his passion for great literature and make even the most complex works accessible. He devoted his life to fighting ignorance and promoting human dignity. Professor de Coninck, on behalf of the thousands of students you thought to think better, I thank you. Thanks to you, today we are freer and more independent. On behalf of his friends Gilbert Larochelle and Jean-François de Raymond, I would like to offer my sincere condolences to the family of Mr. Thomas de Coninck. The Honourable Member for Mont-Saint-Bruno-L'Acadie. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud to speak today to highlight Scout Week, which took place last week, I want to pay tribute to the thousands of young people who bring this great movement to life across the country. The French-speaking Scout movement is the largest youth movement in Canada. It brings together nearly 10,000 young people and more than 3,000 dedicated volunteers. Scouting is more than just outdoor activities. It is an environment that helps young people gain confidence, become independent, and help others. I would also like to recognize the remarkable work of the groups in my riding of Mont-Saint-Bruno-L'Acadie, which bring together more than 75 young people. I invite all of my colleagues to join me in wishing all of our young people a wonderful Scout Week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saskatoon South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Saskatchewan have shown the country what generosity truly looks like through the incredible tradition of the Kinsman Telemiracle Telethon. Telemiracle brings communities together to raise funds for life-changing medical equipment, mobility supports, and specialized care in my province. Saskatchewan residents have helped to raise over $171 million since 1977. Starting tomorrow, the 22-hour telethon kicks off, marking a half-century of entertainment and fundraising. Congratulations, Telemiracle, on 50 years as a true Saskatchewan treasure. Where are we going? Higher! Saskatchewan, get ready to ring those phones.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Speaker, when was the last time you thought about the health of your heart? For many Canadians, the risk of cardiovascular disease is in top of mind. But the 1 Million Canadian Hearts campaign led by the Ottawa Heart Institute, located in my riding of Ottawa Centre, is hoping to change that. As part of the activities to mark 50 years of operation, the Heart Institute has launched this campaign to screen 1 million Canadians for cardiovascular disease risk factors. This work will raise awareness, enable early treatment, and ultimately save lives. Founded by Dr. Wilbur Keon, 50 years on at the Ottawa Heart Institute, they are celebrating a legacy built on innovation, compassion, and relentless pursuit of excellence. Congratulations to everyone who works at the Ottawa Heart Institute on their 50th anniversary. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Speaker, a perfect storm is brewing on Canada's prairies, and this Liberal government is refusing to act. The exploding population of Richardson ground squirrels and farmers' loss of strychnine to control them spells disaster for the upcoming growing season. Widespread infestations have led to severe damage to croplands and pastures. By removing a tool that farmers have used for generations, they're being forced to resort to far worse alternatives. These ineffective methods of gopher control are resulting in economic losses, more injury to livestock, and a crisis for farm and food sustainability. The Liberal Agriculture Minister made a commitment to farmers that he support the application of strychnine for emergency use. The Prime Minister promised to change the mandate for the Pest Management Regulatory Agency to consider the cost of food in all regulatory decisions without putting health and safety at risk. Speaker, these promises have not been fulfilled. Canada's farmers are calling on the Liberals to support farmers' choice in pest management and approve emergency use of strychnine for provinces that request it.
The honourable member for Saint-Boniface-Saint-Vital. Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight the 57th edition of the Festival du Voyageur, which has concluded in Winnipeg. Created to honour the heritage of the voyageurs and celebrate the Francophone community in Western Canada, this festival embodies a spirit of courage, solidarity, and pride. The voyageur spirit is that of builders who come together despite the winter to celebrate their culture and pass it on with passion. For nearly 60 years, this event has brought together thousands of people around music, history, gastronomy, and impressive snow sculptures. This year, despite the cold, more than 70,000 festival goers answered the call. More than 200 artists performed on stage, from the Grand Francophone opening to the Valentine's Day and Louis Riel Day. The Festival du Voyageur remains the largest cultural event in Manitoba and Western Canada. I would like to extend my warmest thanks to the organizers, artists, and volunteers. Hee-haw.
The member for Calgary Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Prime Minister promised the fastest-growing economy in the G7, but new Statistics Canada data shows that Canada's economy shrank last quarter, the only country in the G7 to do so. After 10 years of deficits, inflation, higher taxes, anti-development laws, and bloating bureaucracy, growth has stalled and Canadians are paying the price. While other countries build, this government fails to approve nation-building resource projects. The Major Projects Office has yet to approve a single new project despite being created in order to move at unimaginable speed. Business has stalled, net capital is leaving, and per capita GDP has been flat for a decade while Canadians work harder and fall further behind. This is the result of Liberal policies blocking development, suppressing productivity, and driving away investment. Now that Canada is the only G7 economy with a shrinking country with a shrinking economy, will the Liberals finally get their taxes, bureaucracies out of the way and stop making things worse so Canada can build, invest, and grow?
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's about a Team Canada approach. Every Liberal member of Parliament understands the importance of the Canada-USA trade. Every Liberal member of Parliament. Now, we have a Conservative member of Parliament while the leader of the Conservative Party is trying to reset his trade position. You have a Conservative member of Parliament that travels to the USA, meets with the President, meets with the Vice President, and what does he come back saying? Well, let me quote. Canada is shooting itself in the foot with anti-American hissy fit on trade. Shame on the Conservative Party. Now you take a look at the Cuba issue. You have a Conservative MP that is saying, Mr. Speaker, that Canada should not be contributing to Cuba, but the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party says he is wrong. We should. Who is actually making foreign policy in the Conservative Party today, Mr. Speaker?
Oral questions. Questions oral. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
The Canadian economy is suffering the effects of unjustified tariffs from the Trump administration in the U.S. Conservatives propose creating a strategic critical mineral reserve as well as an all-party CUSMA working group to address these challenges and to create a tariff-free auto pact. This would restore our leverage and support Canadian manufacturing. So will the government work with us to ensure that Canada can negotiate trade deals that benefit our workers and our economy?
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Speaker, to answer directly to my colleague, obviously we can. We can get to a good deal. This is exactly why the Prime Minister is engaged, but also this is exactly why our colleague, the Minister of Canada-US Trade, is in Washington today, meeting with the representative for trade to do that work. That being said, we took good note of what the leader of the opposition said yesterday at a Canadian club, and we're very happy that a lot of our program is being copied.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Conservatives have consistently demonstrated a willingness to work with the government to get results for Canadians in the face of these unjustified tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump. Look at the constructive amendments to the budget bill that they adopted and our support for efforts to relieve taxes on Canadians in this challenging time. Our proposal for an all-party CUSMA working group to get a tariff-free auto pact, to create a strategic critical mineral reserve will help us to negotiate from a position of strength. So will the government accept our offer to work together to get the best results in the interest of all Canadians?
Minister of Industry.
Mr. Speaker, there are lots of things we cannot control. Certainly we can control the White House, but there are lots of things we can control. And what we can control is how to build one strong Canadian economy. Who said that first? Prime Minister Carney. Who copied that yesterday? The leader of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, of course we'll work on an auto pact that is tariff-free. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we will work to have a strong critical mineral supply. And of course, we want to work as one Team Canada. The Conservatives should just get on board.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Sturgeon River.
Speaker, the numbers are in, and Canada's economy shrank during the fourth quarter of 2025. In fact, Canada's economy is the only shrinking economy in the G7. The Prime Minister promised to build the strongest economy in the G7. Instead, he's delivered the weakest. So, in the face of that, will the Prime Minister accept any responsibility for the dismal state of Canada's economy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
It's always interesting when the Conservatives cite reports. They only cite part of the report. Of course, it's unfortunate that we saw a contraction of 0.6% in real GDP. What else does the report say? It says that consumer demand is up. It says that domestic business investment is up. Beyond that, my colleague's very well read. I'm sure he read Bloomberg yesterday. The highest foreign direct investment Canada has seen since 2007 at almost $100 billion. A major nation-building project is exactly what this country is engaged in to bring jobs and purchasing power. We will achieve exactly that.
The Honourable Member of St. Albert, Sturgeon River.
Speaker, here's the reality. Under this Prime Minister's watch, more investment dollars have left Canada than come in.
That's right.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has doubled down on the worst policies of Justin Trudeau. Higher taxes, inflationary spending, and the same anti-development laws. Not a single major project approved. Right. So with a record like that, is it any wonder that Canada has the worst economy in the G7?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, the apparent new trade critic, I don't know what he is, foreign affairs critic from Oshawa Bowmanville talks about a hissy-fit doctrine of the Conservative Party. What is this government doing under the Prime Minister's leadership? Forging new trade relationships, forging new investment opportunities. We see the result in terms of foreign direct investment in a nation-building agenda that will lead, as I said, to new jobs, the purchasing power that comes from that. Along the way, we know that those results are not immediate, of course. We are cutting taxes for Canadians. We are continuing to put in affordability measures. We will continue to be there for the people of this country. It's a serious agenda for a serious time.
The Honourable Member, Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals promised the strongest economy in the G7. Statistics Canada data released this morning confirms the opposite, the failure of their approach. Real GDP contracted by 0.2% in the last quarter of 2025. In fact, Canada is now the only G7 country whose economy is in decline, given that GDP per capita is stagnating and Canadians are working harder just to fall further behind. When will this government stop hamstringing our economy with taxes and bureaucracies so that we can finally become competitive again with our allies? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Thank you very much. I have a great deal of respect for my colleague, but I'd correct what she was saying because, in fact, we've created more jobs than the U.S. last year. 189,000 new jobs, which is more than in the U.S., and yet the American economy is 10 times bigger than the Canadian economy. In fact, our exports also increased to Europe by 31%, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and we are a destination for foreign direct investment, which is incredible, which is why we're attracting so much investment to Canada. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. My data is current. Today's reports show an alarming trend for the third consecutive year. Government spending is artificially propping up GDP, while business investment is declining. In the auto sector, production has fallen by half since the Liberals took office, threatening thousands of jobs. In fact, projects are stalled and capital is fleeing this country. When will this government cut red tape to give Canadian entrepreneurs some breathing room? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague mentioned, perhaps it would be wise to read an entire report when you quote from it and to realize that in the fourth quarter of this year, internal demand was very high. That's domestic demand. Foreign investment has resumed. And the only negative point was the drop in inventory. Usually when inventory drops, it means in the next quarter, production will resume and pick up steam. So we can say that we are going strong. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, just imagine retiring only then to not receive your old age pension for 9 months. This is the kind of problem that 85,000 people are experiencing here because of the Curam software. 85,000 is the figure dating back to the end of January. The minister has not updated these figures yet. We hope the situation has improved, but on Monday, the president of the Professional Institute of the Public Service said he feared that millions of people would eventually be affected. When will there be a public and independent inquiry into this fiasco before it gets any worse? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Labour. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I would recommend that he read the Auditor General's report on the modernization of benefits, or even read testimony from public accounts. Of course, we are working to address the backlog, but we have to remember this is the largest digital project ever undertaken by the Government of Canada. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, I hope so, given these figures. It's so costly. 85,000 victims of CURAM errors and perhaps more. We just don't know. $5 billion in cost overruns, and the Liberals keep repeating that there is no problem. But we're looking at those reports that she's telling us to read. This is precisely why the National Assembly is unanimously calling for an independent public inquiry into federal computer programs once and for all. We will find out why there are citizens who are harmed, who they are, and cost overruns. Clean things up once and for all where there be an inquiry.
We've been at this all week. Let me try to correct the member opposite's assertions. There is no cost overrun. The first phase of this project is on track with respect to modernizing old age security. There are other phases of work still to come, similarly to modernize EI and Canadian Pension Plan benefits. The Auditor General has looked at this. The Public Accounts Committee has looked at this. The government provided a response to this House based on the Parliamentary Committee's report. Let's stop sowing confusion on this and get back to the facts, please.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, Lithium, a Quebec company, will be bought by Americans if Ottawa fails to invest $30 million by March 3rd. 4 days, that's how much time we have left to avoid losing another company in our industry, this time to an American rival heavily subsidized by Washington. The battery recycling market expected to reach $70 billion by 2040. It's worth the investment. Abandoning a Quebec company to the Americans because of a lack of federal action is exactly the opposite of the Prime Minister's election promises. Will the Liberals finally support Lithion? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, we've had conversations with the company. Of course, the company is facing financial difficulties. The government of Quebec has decided not to go ahead to support this company, but we believe in this battery industry, and we also believe that Lithion has significant assets in keeping with our strength in the area of critical minerals. So I've already worked with the Bloc Québécois on this to find solutions, and we will find solutions. Got her. Van Popta.
Someone has their microphone open
can have hope for a better future.
Yes. The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, once again, as I said earlier, my colleague also said it earlier, when one reads a report from Statistics Canada, one should read the whole report. What we find out in today's report is that for the year 2025, for the whole year, economic growth in Canada was 1.7%, plus 1.7%. That makes it the second fastest in the OECD area. And on top of that, we created more, in absolute terms, more jobs here than in the US. No, we are not falling apart, Mr. President.
The Honourable Member.
In Northern Ontario, once a prosperity for young Canadians, has become the source of economic anxiety for over 60% of millennials. Chapleau in my region, a logging, mining and rail town, where young Canadians chased opportunity, now stand as an example of the affordability crisis facing our youth. Canada is now the only G7 economy moving backwards. When will this government let Canadians build, invest, and grow again?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. I know he is sincere in his wanting to support forestry sector. He does try to work with us on occasion in committee. I really do hope, however, the Conservatives will bring that more positively forward in the House generally and help us vote in support of an agenda that is trying to modernize and strengthen the forestry sector in Canada. We've announced $2.5 billion in support so far. We have a transformation task force going on right now. We do want to work with you, sir. You, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all.
The Honourable Member for Leduc-Wetaskiwin.
Real leaders take ownership of their mistakes. They learn and they change. Contrast that with the daily Liberal approach in this House. Blame, blame, blame. The fact is the Prime Minister's signature election promise was to, quote, build the strongest economy in the G7. That exact phrase appeared word for word 10 times in the Liberal platform. Today we learned that Canada has the only shrinking economy in the G7. Our global competitors faced with the same global challenges are all doing better. Will someone take some ownership over there and admit that record Liberal spending is crushing the Canadian economy?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is very clear, coming out of the last election, less than a year ago, Canadians elected a new Prime Minister with a mandate to build a strong and healthy Canada. That's exactly what we are doing. Whether it is budgetary motions, whether it is legislative measures, this is exactly what Canadians want, and that is exactly what this caucus continues to deliver. Contrary to what Conservatives like to spread, misinformation, Canada is still the best country in the world to call home.
Member for Leduc-Wetaskiwin.
Speaking of misinformation, let's talk about Liberal promises in the last election. 10 months ago, Canadians trusted the Liberal Prime Minister when he promised a budget deficit of only $62 billion. 5 months ago, that number ballooned to $78 billion, and again this month they added billions more. Promise clearly broken. 10 months ago, Canadians trusted the Liberal Prime Minister when he promised to, quote, build the strongest economy in the G7. Today we have the weakest economy in the G7, and it is actually shrinking. Promise clearly broken. Why should Canadians believe anything anyone over there has to say now?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary, Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, contrast the Conservatives with the government of the day and the Prime Minister. We believe in Canadians. Right. We are investing in Canada's infrastructure. We are investing in Canadians. All the Conservatives want to do is talk down Canada. Have I got a news flash for the members opposite? You have a choice. Either come on side, be a part of Team Canada, or continue what you're doing, which is not representing your constituents, it's representing the Conservative Party of Canada. Let's be there for Canadians first.
Just remind the experienced member to address his questions through the chair.
The honourable member for Beauharnois-Salaberry-Soulanges-Huntington. Mr. Speaker, the government has announced a grant program for the transportation of Canadian steel that targets only rail, excluding maritime transport. However, our ship owners have historically shipped hundreds of thousands of tons of steel per year. These flows are actively being threatened by the lack of support. Interprovincial maritime transport is essential to supply chains, and Transport Canada's mandate is precisely to promote an integrated transportation system. Will the minister correct this inconsistency and include domestic maritime transport in this program?
The Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Industry. Why not? I have a great deal of respect for my colleague. I know she works her files really diligently, and she represents her riding where maritime transport is very important. I'd be happy to work with her on these important matters. We are also looking for ways, of course, to transport steel throughout the country as we further develop significant major projects here in the country, and we will work with the Minister of Transport on this matter. So I'd be happy to work with her. Following question period. The honourable member for Beauharnois-Salaberry-Soulanges-Huntington. Mr. Speaker, here at home, the Port of Valleyfield, Desgagnés Logistique is at risk of losing customers because Transport Canada has decided to create unfair competition between rail and maritime transport. The federal government is jeopardizing ports, jobs, and entire logistics corridors. If the minister recognizes the importance of maritime transport and the hundreds of thousands of tons of steel that depend on it, can he make a clear commitment to add a domestic maritime component to the program and with a concrete timelines? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague knows full well that if that specific company has financial issues, we can work together through Economic Development Canada for the Quebec region that I am responsible for to support the company. That said, yes, I would be happy to look into this matter with the Minister of Transport to find a solution that matters for people in Valleyfield. Thank you.
Murray Cold Lake.
Child poverty in Canada has risen for the third consecutive year. In 2025, nearly 30,000 more children fell below the poverty line, according to the latest Child and Family Poverty Report Card. The progress our country once made is not just slowing, we're going backwards. Behind every statistic is a child going without, a family stretched beyond its limits, and parents forced to make impossible choices. When will the Liberal government reverse the rise in child poverty, reduce the cost of living, and strengthen our economy so Canadians can afford basic necessities?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that same report mentions how our government's investments in the Canada Child Benefit, in dental care and child care, are helping families lower their cost of living. This is, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Conservatives in this question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the supports that we have in place to help all children. One child in poverty is too many, but that's why we have Mr. Speaker, if I may. Mr. Speaker, that's why we have a Canada Child Benefit that is tax-free. A majority of the recipients of that are lone parent families. 90% are single moms. Those are the kind of supports that this government is putting in place and enhancing while those Conservatives continue.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Nearly 1 in 5 children under 6 in Canada is living in under poverty due to their government. 2.5 million children are growing up in food insecure households, and most alarmingly of all, the number of children in severely food insecure households has doubled between 2019 and 2023. Far too many parents, the gap between working hard and making ends meet is become impossible. For too many children, opportunity is being replaced with uncertainty. At what point will the Liberal government confront the reality families are facing, take meaningful actions to lower cost, and rebuild an economy where no child is left behind?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we should all be outraged about child poverty, but what we actually need are concrete plans, and that's why this government, when we bring forward plans like the National School Food Program, like affordable childcare, it would be nice to have the support of the members opposite in passing those programs. Why has it been so difficult for us to have a permanent national school food program in this country? Why do the Conservatives not stand up and support affordable childcare that helps families? Mr. Speaker, why won't the Conservatives stand up and support proudly our Canada Groceries and Essential Benefits to help families? They won't do that. The outrage is unwarranted.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you, Speaker. For nearly a decade of this Liberal government, child poverty is rising for the third straight year. Nearly 30,000 more children have fallen below the poverty line, and almost 1 in 5 children are now living in poverty. Families are not just struggling, Speaker, they are falling further behind. Why, after many years, 10 years of higher taxes, higher deficits, higher inflation, are Canadian children worse off under this government?
Hear, hear. Order. We'll just have the cross conversation just to tone it down a little bit. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would be excellent for Canadians to also ask why, after so many years, these Conservatives continue to vote against the very programs that are supporting families in need, the most vulnerable families in our country, and our kids. Why won't they support a national school food program that we've put in place that's going to help 500,000 kids coast to coast? Why won't they support making it permanent? Why won't they support affordable childcare, which is helping nearly 1 million kids across this country get early learning in childcare? These are the type of programs that support families and support our kids, but somehow the Conservatives won't stand up and support these programs when they get the chance.
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
This government fails to realize is that when people are better off, when they have more money in their pockets, they don't need endless government programs. They have a responsibility to provide for their own families through good jobs, but yet we have a cost of living crisis. We have more children, 30,000 more children living in poverty. There are so many insecure households, food insecurity households in this country. It's doubled, and now working parents can't even afford food on the table. How much worse does it have to get before this Liberal government lowers costs, fixes the economy, and lets Canadian families keep more of what they earn?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
There are children living in poverty in this country, and we have an opportunity to fight for them. This government supports the Canada Child Benefit because it goes to 6 million kids. 3.5 million families get the Canada Child Benefit, but the Conservatives have never supported it. Childcare, we support it. They do not. What about pharmacare, the beginnings of it? That helps families too. We support it. They do not. When it comes to the school food program, the honourable member across the way called it garbage a few months ago. Have we forgotten that? Mr. Speaker, it's a hard time. Let's have the backs of Canadians pursuing serious agendas, not games.
The honourable member for Similkameen, South Okanagan West, Kootenay.
When are the Liberals going to realize these programs aren't working? I was recently approached by a young mom who told me how hard it's become to feed her children. It was heart-wrenching. I see her face now when I hear child poverty rose for a third straight year in Canada. Nearly 30,000 more children fell below the poverty line. When will this Liberal government end the trend of child poverty getting worse every year?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's really ironic for them to talk down our programs when they don't even have a plan. Not only that, they're voting against every solution that we are putting forward to ease the burden of families and put more money into the pockets of Canadians. The dental plan, the groceries benefit, affordable childcare, national school food program. No one really believes that the Conservatives are there to protect the most vulnerable. Let's be serious, Mr. Speaker. I enjoin them to work with us for real solution. Thank you.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, cancer can upend lives in an instant. Every Canadian knows someone, be it a friend, a family member, or a colleague, who has faced a cancer diagnosis. It is a disease that touches far too many families across our country. Even some members of this House have sadly faced that news themselves. We all understand the importance of prevention and early detection. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health update the House on what the government is doing to strengthen cancer prevention and ensure more Canadians benefit from early detection?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable colleague for this question. My mom is a cancer survivor, and I know what it's like when a loved one goes through cancer treatments. We also know that prevention matters. Up to 40% of cancer cases could be prevented. That's why I'm proud that our government announced $41 million for groundbreaking cancer prevention research. Through the Canadian Institute of Health Research and partner organizations, we are supporting 19 teams whose work will save lives, build a healthier Canada, and make sure we get to spend more time with our loved ones.
The honourable member from Montmorency Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, the face of poverty is changing. Today, it looks like single mothers who are skipping meals to buy nice clothes for their children so they don't get made fun of at school. Field trips have become a luxury, and families are going into debt so their children don't get left out. This is the result of 11 years of Liberal policies. Families don't want pity. They don't want government handouts. They want to be able to take care of their children on their own. When will Liberals understand that their radical programs do not work and change course so that every child can live a life of plenty? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, my colleague spoke about radicalism. Well, the Conservatives are showing radicalism right now. We believe that the state has a role to play to reduce poverty through social programs. We strongly believe that social programs are important and that they contribute to improving the lives of families. I suppose Conservatives would like to get rid of them. That would make things even harder for families. The honourable member from Montmorency Charlevoix. Despite all of these well-intended Liberal programs, child poverty has increased again for a third straight year. Almost 30,000 more children fell below the poverty line. 1 in 5 children under 6 are living in poverty. 2.5 million children are living in food-insecure families. In Montmorency Charlevoix, families are having trouble paying rent, and our community organizations are being overwhelmed. Why? After so much massive spending and historic deficits, are our children losing access to resources and facing food insecurity? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, poverty is a problem in general, and especially poverty affecting children. Food insecurity is a very important and concerning issue, and that is why I invite the colleagues across the way to work with us to reduce poverty by increasing economic growth, creating good jobs that lead to good paychecks. But if we cut social programs, things will be even worse, Mr. Speaker.
Central Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, Liberal policies have made child poverty worse. The Child and Family Poverty Report Card shows child poverty rising for a third straight year. Nearly 30,000 more children are falling below the poverty line, almost 1 in 5 children under age 6 now living in poverty. The number of children in severe food insecure households doubled between 2019 and 2023. When will this Liberal government stop making child poverty worse, start caring about family food affordability, and create a working economy so Canadians can afford to live?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw attention to the fact that there is no government in history who has done more to support families across this country. Whether that is introducing $10 a day, affordable, high-quality childcare for almost 1 million families in this country, whether that is introducing the National School Food Program. Mr. Speaker, we have been there for families, and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
The honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Obviously, if those programs were working, then we wouldn't have so many children living in poverty. Yeah! Mr. Speaker, Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable." So it's unfortunate that child poverty in Canada has risen for the 3rd year in a row. More than 800,000 children in this country are currently living in poverty, and that number has more than doubled since 2020. When will this Liberal government reverse the trend of child poverty getting worse under their watch and create an economy where Canadians can afford to live?
The Honourable Secretary of State, Rural Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to know that many families in Canada and the challenge they face have to be recognized. I was very proud to stand in our very capable Minister of Jobs and Family in Regina several weeks ago to announce $1.6 billion to help offset daycare fees for the people that want to re-enter the economy, Mr. Speaker. But any day of the week, Mr. Speaker, I will compare our progress on helping families afford the needs of their children over the Conservatives who cut and got many programs in their past.
The honourable member for Northumberland Clark.
Mr. Speaker, the poverty has risen for children for the third year in a row. Nearly 30,000 more children are falling below the poverty line this year. 1 in 5 children under the age of 6 now live in poverty. Mr. Speaker, if this doesn't cause the Liberals to act, I don't know what will. When will these Liberals finally meaningfully address the affordability crisis and limit their inflationary spending and get rid of all taxes on food?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, before I came on this side of the House, I was so excited when the child food school program was put forward. You know why? I grew up in a First Nations community amongst the many kids that lived in the poverty line. You know, and I go down to my community center, I watch kids go into our community center, they get a breakfast, they get a lunch, they go to school with full bellies. When I graduated from high school, I was one of very few that graduated from high school. Now we're seeing kids graduate in record numbers in my community, and I have no doubt it's because of the nutritious breakfast and lunches that they get. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
While the minister continues to deny issues with their software system, Curum, tens of thousands of Canadians have been impacted by the Liberals' botched update. Cases are backlogged, benefits are delayed, and seniors are left paying the price. The program, which was set to cost less than $2 billion, has ended up costing $5 billion more. Why do Liberal programs always massively exceed their projected costs? And why are seniors forced to pay the price for Liberal incompetence?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let me try to correct some of the members' assertions today. There is no cost overrun on this project. It is the first phase. Project is on track with respect to modernizing old age security. When this project is complete, as it is now delivering benefits on time and accurately for over 7.7 million seniors, we're going to see that this new modernization is actually there to support Canadians in some of our largest benefit programs for the next generation. It was entirely necessary, and the Conservatives should know this because there was a 2011 report from Public Accounts that encouraged them to start doing the work, which they didn't.
Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
The Liberals refuse to be transparent with Canadians. The Auditor General has reported these cost overruns numerous times. Their attempt at updating an outdated technology has ended up costing Canadians $5 billion more, 3 times more than they projected. The bottom line is this: Canadian seniors deserve better than Liberal excuses and denial. Why is it that Liberals can't ever deliver on time or on budget?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, this modernization project is the largest IT project ever undertaken by the Government of Canada. When it is completed, it is going to finish necessary modernization of our biggest benefit programs that millions of Canadians rely on, delivering billions of benefits over the course of our lives. This is a 60-year-old program that required updating. It is in progress. It is delivering benefits to over 7.7 million seniors right now, accurately and on time. It's the first phase. We're going to continue doing this work carefully. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm a member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, the party of cost runs is at it again. This time it's the flawed Curum system. $6.6 billion disaster that has tens of thousands of seniors hurt by the latest boondoggle from this incompetent Liberal government. So what's the Liberals' response? It's Canadians' fault for too many of them growing older and becoming seniors and flooding the system. Why are seniors being forced to pay the price for continued Liberal incompetence?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the 2011 report of the Public Accounts Committee sounded this alarm on lack of sustainable funding for renewing IT infrastructure, noting that major funding shortfalls posed a high risk that core programs couldn't support the aging system. But the Conservatives at the time in government chose to do nothing about it. Today, these investments are long overdue. The system is in critical need of updating and modernization to move it off of a paper-based 60-year-old system so that Canadians can rely on it and benefits can be delivered securely in the years to come.
Member for Edmonton West.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the party of ArriveCan is once again trying to deflect from their recent failure on the OAS payment software. And just like with ArriveCan, they're spending more energy blaming others than actually fixing the problem. Seniors are waiting over 6 months sometimes to get their OAS. When will Liberals stop hiding behind their excuses, admit their billion-dollar failure, and take action to ensure seniors receive their old age security?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we take the member's comments very seriously. 7.7 million seniors are receiving their benefits on time and accurately in a system that is now designed to be more modern, accessible, and secure. I would encourage the member, as the minister has said repeatedly, if he knows of cases where there's urgent need, we are set up to deal with them in 24 to 48 hours, and we're very happy to do that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Opposition members like to say that our great country is broken. These are not just distasteful comments, they are false ones. Canada has what the world wants: an abundance of natural resources, a qualified workforce, solid, diversified trade agreements. On this side of the House, we believe in Canada. We believe in supporting our businesses and our workers. I would like to ask the Parliamentary Secretary how this confidence is being translated into generational investments in the Canadian economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I would like to thank my colleague for that excellent question. He is right. Mean-spirited slogans are not a plan. But on this side of the House, we do have a plan to build a strong, resilient economy, and it is paying off. Private investment is up for the fourth quarter in a row, and just yesterday, Statistics Canada announced that foreign direct investment in the Canadian economy has reached its highest level in 18 years. Our plan is working. We have a serious plan, and it is bearing fruit.
Mr. Speaker, this government's Quorum system is causing delays for hundreds of seniors who depend on OAS and GIS to pay their expenses. These services are vital to seniors on fixed income. 4 cost overruns were reported by the Auditor General in 2025. Similar incidents persist in every software program they attempt to execute. When will this Liberal government accept accountability for another software system that has failed, costing taxpayers $5 billion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to try to shed some light on this again for the members opposite. This program is initiative is a phased program. There is no cost overrun. The modernization of our old age security systems is necessary. I think all Canadians would understand that 60-year-old computer programs are outdated, obsolete, and at risk. And so if we want Canadians to have their benefits on time and accurately, as this program is already delivering to over 7.7 million seniors, we need to be modernizing it. We need to be moving to modernize our other systems around EI and CPP as well. This is necessary to support the biggest benefit programs the Government of Canada has.
The Honourable Member for Coteau-Sud-Rivière-du-Loup, Kataskamekw-Témiscouata. Mr. Speaker, Ottawa doesn't just have a software problem, it has a systemic problem. Every time the Liberals hand over a file to a private company, costs skyrocket and accountability dries up. We had Phoenix, we had ArriveCan, and now we have Curam. $6.6 billion spent. Half of it went to consultants. Meanwhile, thousands of seniors are waiting for their pensions. When will these Liberals admit that the real problem isn't their software, it's how they manage it? Meanwhile, consultants are getting richer, and our seniors are growing poorer as they wait to receive their checks. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
With great respect to the member opposite, I really would recommend to him the reports of the Auditor General on benefit delivery modernization, the testimony, the report of the Public Accounts Committee, both in 2011 and also from this past fall. We are obviously working to address the outstanding cases, but let's please keep in perspective that this is the single largest IT modernization project the Government of Canada has ever had, and right now it is delivering accurate and on-time benefits to over 7.7 million seniors.
Member for St. John, St. Croix.
Mr. Speaker, another federal wharf in my riding has been condemned. Many others in New Brunswick need urgent repairs. Federal wharves are the lifeblood of coastal communities, but they are being neglected by the Liberals. Just as inland economies rely on highways and airports to get products to market, Atlantic Canada relies on wharves to export high-quality seafood to the rest of Canada and around the world. In the last election, the Prime Minister promised an extra $250 million for federal wharves, but the budget didn't include a nickel. Is this another Liberal broken promise?
Yes, sir. Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, small craft harbors are fixtures of coastal communities and our economy. That's exactly why our government is investing hundreds of millions of dollars into our small craft harbors. We're building the infrastructure that allows our harvesters to do their jobs, support their families and their communities. Thank you.
The honourable member for Milton East, Halton Hills South.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, I was proud to stand alongside my colleagues on this side of the House to vote in favor of Bill C-15. In addition to unlocking generational investments to help build a strong, modern, resilient Canadian economy, Bill C-15 contains important measures to make life more affordable for Canadians, including measures to advance open banking. Can the Parliamentary Secretary let us know how open banking reforms will allow Canadians to securely share financial data and give consumers clearer choices and better tools to manage their finances?
Sure. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
In her short time as a Member of Parliament, this member is making outstanding contributions on the Committee for Public Accounts. She's doing great work in the constituency. She brings great experience as a former town councillor, and importantly, as a lawyer, she stood up for women who had been abused in domestic relationships. Mr. Speaker, she points to Bill C-15. Of course, its main focus is the economy, but within that bill is a focus also on open banking. The autonomy provided by open banking can help women experiencing violence in relationships. It's another way that we're showing support for people across communities and especially vulnerable populations. We'll continue to do that.
I'm a member for Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are failing to stop criminals from stealing our cars. Vehicle identification numbers, or VINs, from exported vehicles are being used to sell stolen cars. CBSA has a record of these VINs, but refuses to share it with Canadian used car dealers who would use it to identify stolen vehicles. Instead, the government has given an American company a monopoly on this data, charging Canadians $40 million each year just to get access to our own data. It's absurd. Why won't the Liberals give Canadians access to our own data so that we can stop car theft?
That's it. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, combating crime.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is great to hear the honourable member talk about pieces of legislation that are required to catch criminals and put them away. The fact of the matter is, we've had significant pieces of legislation in front of this House for almost a year. Strong Borders Act, Combating Hate Act, bail reform, intimate partner violence, significant pieces of legislation that the Conservatives have obstructed and prevented from getting passed. So why don't you come over here and join us in catching the criminals?
Order again. Comments to the chair. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Jobs and Families said, in quotes, nobody should be expected to work for free. Yet this came after the Liberals undermined CUPE flight attendant strike against unpaid labour using Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code, siding with their corporate friends. Last week, this anti-worker stance led to a final settlement that CUPE said was, in quotes, not the outcome the union fought to achieve. Shame. Will the Liberals finally recognize workers' rights and support my bill to repeal Section 107?
Great question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we stand firmly on the side of the House that nobody should work for free in this country. We take any kind of claims of unpaid work very seriously. Workers must be paid for the hours that they work. We're going to make sure that employers are following the rules. And we stood up in terms of the airline industry to make sure that we were doing an investigation into the labor practices in that industry. We are continuing with that investigation right now to get further information to make sure that those practices are in compliance with the labor code.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Minister for Housing. We were stunned as British Columbia MPs when the provincial government killed the BC Community Housing Fund. We now have projects that are ready to roll. The land has been purchased, the zoning's completed, the permits are in place for senior low-income housing, for veterans housing, on Galiano Island, on Main Island, in Saanich, and across British Columbia. Will the federal government step up and create a defined program for shovel-ready projects to make sure the housing gets built for the people who need it?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for this important question. The Prime Minister has been clear. We need to focus on what we can control. That's why our government announced a new partnership with BC that will deliver 1,100 homes across the province with shovels in the ground in the months to come. This partnership includes 700 supportive and transitional homes. We're also delivering right now, just today, the Minister is visiting Bob and Michael's place in BC. That is a place with Enable federal funding that are opening doors today as they provide 200 supportive homes for the community. This is an important issue and we're taking action, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Order, and that concludes question period for today.
Routine proceedings. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 32.2 and consistent with the policy on the tabling of treaties in Parliament, I have the honour to table in both official languages the treaty entitled Amendments to the International Health Regulations 2005, adopted at Geneva on the 1st of June 2024.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Presenting reports from interparliamentary delegations.
From committees, the Honourable Member for St. John, St. Croix.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai l'honneur.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor of presenting in both official languages the following three reports from the Public Accounts Committee. The fifth report, called Follow-up Study on Comparative Study between Genders.
Arctic Water Surveillance. And the seventh report, entitled Delivering Canada's Future Fighter Jet Capability. Pursuant to the Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to each of these reports.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant des députés.
Introduction of private members' bills.
Bills. Motion.
Motions.
Presenting petition. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member for Riding Mountain.
It's always an honor to present a petition on behalf of constituents. Mr. Speaker, I rise for the seventh time on behalf of the people of Dauphin, Manitoba, to present a petition on the rising rate of crime. Residents of Dauphin and the Parkland region are demanding that the Liberal government repeal their soft-on-crime policies that have fueled a surge in crime throughout their communities. Since 2015, there has been a 54% increase in violent crime and a 75% increase in sexual assaults across Canada. Petitioners are deeply concerned of what they've read in local papers, including a November report that Dauphin RCMP are searching for a wanted man with 3 separate arrest warrants. Our once safe communities are now turned into places where people fear for their lives because the government's catch and release policies have allowed violent repeat offenders to be out on bail instead of in jail. Mr. Speaker, the people of Dauphin and the Parkland region demand that this Liberal government repeal their soft-on-crime policies that directly threaten their livelihoods and their community. I fully support the good people of Dauphin.
Present petition, the Honourable Member for Nunavut.
I'm rising regarding 69 petitioners who are seeking attention on pay equity. They have found that the Office of the Pay Equity Commissioner reported in 2024 that women earned 87 cents for every dollar earned by men, and that gap is even larger for Black, Indigenous, and racialized women. and disabled women. The government of the Yukon, NWT, and Nunavut continue to be exempt from the Pay Equity Act, and they call on the Treasury Board of Canada as an employer has responsibility to establish pay equity plan, and they're calling on the federal government for three things. First, to increase the funding for the Office of the Pay Equity Commissioner, to provide more resources, and to issue an order in council removing the exemptions of the Pay Equity Act to the three territories.
The honourable member for St. John St. Croix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition from Canadians who are concerned about the amendments to Bill C-9 that will put religious leaders and people of faith at risk of political persecution. They note that this amendment would make it possible for a religious leader to be jailed for expressing beliefs in religious text. A member of the government even shared this view, stating that there are passages in the Bible that were, quote, clear hatred, end quote, and that there, quote, should perhaps be discretion for prosecution to press charges, end quote. The petitioners call on the government to repeal this amendment and to protect freedom of religion for Canadians.
Petitions, the honourable member for Central Newfoundland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand today to present again a petition on behalf of the recreational scallopers in Newfoundland and Labrador to provide for a more inclusive licensing policy. Special thanks to Gerald Parrott from Harbour Breton for collecting the names on this petition. Mr. Speaker, elderly, physically challenged and disabled want the ability to use a mechanical hauler to retrieve their scallop rakes. These rakes can weigh hundreds of pounds once they've been towed over the bottom for a little while. Also, Mr. Speaker, this petition calls for commercial scallopers to be allowed to hold a recreational scallop license. I look forward to a response from the Regional Minister for Newfoundland and Labrador that's much better than the nonsense that we received from her Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And the words C9 are words that I think are known well right across this whole nation. And I have multiple petitions here today that I will present to the House from these citizens and residents of Canada that indicate that they are very concerned about the Liberal Bloc amendment to Bill C-9 that would be used to criminalize passages from the Bible, which would literally criminalize individual people for sharing and talking about their faith in the scriptures. The state has no place in the religious texts or teachings of any faith community. Freedom of expression and freedom of religion are fundamental rights in Canada, and they have to be preserved. Therefore, these individuals are calling on the Liberal Government of Canada to protect religious freedom, not attack it, uphold the right to read and share sacred texts, and prevent government overreach into matters of faith. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétition. Questions on the order paper. The honourable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is it agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement Sénat, reprise du débat en deuxième lecture du projet de loi S2, loi modifiant la loi sur les Indiens, nouveau droit à l'inscription.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, l'honour of Deputy Côte-Nord, Kawawachkamak, Neat.
Honourable member, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour for me to be standing up, speaking to the bill S2. The first thing I would like to say before I get into the substance of the bill is to really underline our solidarity, myself and Bloc Québécois, with regard to women, and I specifically say women because they are suffering the most since from the discrimination, sex-based discrimination. So we are with them. We would like to send a message of solidarity and say that the Bloc Québécois is, of course, in favor of the adoption of Bill S2. Having said that, despite the fact that the Bloc Québécois is in favor of the adoption of the bill, we need to remind that Bill S2, such as, and just like other bills that came before, will target recognized injustices recognized by the Supreme Court, but this will be done in an incremental and fragmented way. It doesn't really go to the bottom of the discriminations that have happened vis-à-vis Indigenous women and their descendants and the transmission of status. So the second generation cutoff rule is significant. The Assembly of First Nations highlights this. This is a colonial practice. This is indefensible, and it is arbitrary. You cannot tell to a nation, or you cannot oblige a nation to believe otherwise or make them think that they're not Indigenous. It's not up to the federal government to decide who's member of First Nations. And even the expression of giving status to their children is problematic. Mr. Speaker, we need to demonstrate empathy when we're talking about S2 and talking about everything that has to do with the right in this sense. So I wouldn't, if I were in that position, accept a government dictate what I can or cannot transmit to my children, such as my culture and language. And I refer to previous bills. For more than 40 years, we come in this chamber and we say that these discriminatory and arbitrary provisions of the law needs to be fixed and changed. So I can refer you to Chief Vero Paul, who says that the definition, despite S2, is a colonial definition vis-à-vis members of First Nations. So this has been going on for more than 40 years, but we have to be able to vote in favor of this bill, this bill, as amended, of course, because at the Senate there were lengthy hearings with witnesses and who said that many amendments were called for to this bill. So they had extensive discussions to make sure that this bill goes further in terms of fixing these discriminatory provisions. The second generation cutoff rule is still before us, and it breaks families apart. And we're talking about rules that we can abolish because children are being excluded, and it impacts thousands of people in terms of the place they deserve in their communities. Mr. Speaker, the present day and the future of these communities in terms of their culture and languages are what's at stake here. So this bill can achieve this, and by this I mean get rid of some of these obstacles and discriminatory practices. The government still needs to be encouraged to go further, to undertake changes to the legislation. With S2, what's happening is a repetition of what we've already seen with other bills, S3, for instance, C31, or we have seen decisions of the Supreme Court, rulings of the Supreme Court, who have called upon the government to make changes so that these anti-constitutional provisions become constitutional. But this takes time. It takes a lot of time for these changes to take place, and it is being used as an excuse not to take action. So I've been saying more than 40 years. I'm referring to 1995, but we can refer to previous dates, of course, in our history. But when you decide to present a bill, it takes a lot of time, of course. It takes a lot of resources to put everything together in an efficient way. I would like to continue by talking about the demands as expressed by Indigenous women from Quebec at the Senate Standing Committee. They talked about systemic discrimination against women and children, which are still current day practices.
And I think their First Amendment, or suggested amendment, that we agree with, has to do with repealing the second generation cutoff, which of course is what is of great interest to us, among other things. It's not like one form of discrimination is any better than another, but this provision does affect many people's lives. And when you look at it closer, you see that it really is a strategy. It's almost as though there is some desire behind this bill. In fact, a desire to assimilate. Because this second generation cutoff means that second generation children cannot have access to their own Indigenous status. And what we're noticing is generation after generation, so many children who will not have a right, will not be entitled to their Indigenous status. And again, statistics are one thing, but I do have to use the numbers, but it's an indirect way of extinguishing Indigenous identity, these children who should be recognized as Indigenous. And again, the government's deciding this on their behalf. Indigenous women, again, are the ones that have been mostly made victims of this type of discrimination, specifically provisions of cutoffs where when a woman gets divorced or her husband dies, a woman would no longer be considered Indigenous. No longer. That's been solved. But now we're talking about the second generation, and that's the concern. With the new amendments, the government has simply pushed down the road this desire, this will, and I think it's a will to assimilate First Nations. In fact, I could speak for Quebec, but I think we could look at the figures for Canada. Femmes Autochtones Quebec was saying that 22,000 and some children were excluded. 2026, over 50,000 children were excluded or cut off under 6.2. So by 2066, 60% of those registered will be registered under 6.2, which means 60% is huge. And we know that these 60% of children will no longer be allowed to register on this registry. And again, this Women's Association of Quebec said that it really is a demographic countdown. And I think of a young woman who appeared before the Indigenous Affairs Committee, and she was referring to her own daughter. Of course, she was Indigenous. The father is not Indigenous, so her daughter does not enjoy her own Indigenous status. There's so much being said here about systemic discrimination, but that essentially that's what it means, that children are not allowed to be who they actually are. I'll try to speed up, Mr. Speaker. I've only addressed 2 of my 10 pages so far. I could have added the issue of UNDRIP, the United Nations statement that has looked into this matter, and it contravenes 2 articles of that of the UNDRIP declaration. And I'm thinking about my colleague, Madame Odette, Michelle Odette, the senator, who spoke before the committee on the matter on S2, and she said that, moreover, the government was more restrictive on issues of First Nations identity than on issues of citizenship. So in terms of passing on one's citizenship. So again, The same rules don't apply to all. Indigenous people cannot access this passing on of their status like you would citizenship. So let me change my tack a little bit. The sense of belonging for First Nations. Again, it's this association of Indigenous women in Quebec, Femmes Autochtones Québec. We know that the First Nations themselves are asking to be the authority in decision-making, not the federal government. Who belongs to the band, who does not belong to the band, who belongs to their community. And I feel like this requirement has to do with citizenship and identity. It makes no sense for another nation to decide for this Indigenous nation who should be a part of the nation. And that's something that, it can be said, has been asked for by all stakeholders, the Assembly of First Nations, and the Quebec-Labrador Assembly of First Nations. They all agree. So this registration affects all communities except under Section 10, the belonging to a customary code, but it's most generally all Indigenous groups throughout Canada. And again, if I can state Section 33 of UNDRIP, again, it's a contravention, it's a violation. By not ceding this authority, the federal government has violated UNDRIP because it is a direct and clear impediment to self-determination. So we certainly hope this authority is granted to First Nations. Another issue raised by the Femmes Autochtones du Québec is the issue of forcibly removing the name, forcing for the name of the father to be indicated. The department would presume in the past that the child does not have access to registration. And that affects those mothers under 6-2, those children that are not recognized formally. Again, we should refer to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. My friend, Madame Michelle Odette, also testified on this before the committee. Women and girls have, unfortunately, faced so much violence, so much trauma. And because of these cutoff clauses, women were ripped away from their families, but also families were torn apart. Children, boys also, were torn apart, were pulled out of their communities and no longer considered Indigenous. They would no longer have rights. They would be deprived of their culture, of their language, and they'd be asked to leave. What remains is that if you have to formally recognize the father, it essentially amounts to the same thing. It amounts to saying that some children are no longer allowed to be Indigenous. We're asking for women no longer to have to identify the father. Think about violence. Think about rape. Let's just call things as they are. Rapes. And sometimes for issues of safety, they may not want to declare the name of the father. And in some specific situations, the father's name may be unaware. It may be something that is unknown. According to the Charter, it's a violation of the security rights of women victims of violence. Perhaps a final point that has been the subject of debate, and perhaps even in this House, is the issue of reparations for harms caused by the Indian Act. Because every reform, whether it's C-31, S-3, or others, there was a clause included to prevent any kind of measures to compensate for this discrimination. For women, it's the same thing: loss of status, loss of social and cultural rights, intergenerational trauma. So UNDRIP is asking for reparations to be effective, that victims are allowed to, under UNDRIP. Indigenous women of Quebec are also asking for official apologies. The government needs to issue an official apology for the systemic discrimination against Indigenous women and Indigenous peoples. And the federal government continues to do so. Make no mistake, despite S2, even unamended or with amendments, systemic discrimination remains in the bill. Before I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I would like to add other aspects because I am concerned that there's something that I did address earlier. Before INAN, the committee, we were talking about registration entitlements, but broadly beyond Bill S3, because of course this bill has not yet been referred to the committee. Much has been said about consultations. We are told that there would be a tour, a cross-country tour to see if everyone agrees, if there might not be any other provisions that we could address. And what concerns me in that, like all members of the committee, knowing that the committee was supposed to arrive soon, it's of course there is a deadline. The Supreme Court is requiring that this be addressed before April 26th. So time is of the essence, and now we're told that consultations are required, and I'm worried that of this issue of time. All stakeholders have told us that it's urgent. 2026, I refer to 2046, and then I refer to 2066. We are seeing the extinguishing of rights for children, which means Indigenous communities themselves are jeopardized. The time it takes to implement this actually means jeopardizing the life of these communities. The government has to act quickly. It's fine to consult, and anyhow, not as though the government doesn't consult, but it does things very slowly. But we should pass this with the amendments proposed by the Senate, and then we can do these visits throughout the country. Moreover, we know there are delays in registrations of people on these ban lists. There are so many delays, and service standards in the department are so slow. Thousands of people did not receive their status in time, and which means that this could snowball. We really need resources to address this matter, as well as resources for First Nations, because these changes, when communities are growing, when you look at the issue of services and funding, it doesn't really meet communities' needs. But this all has to be done intelligently. And to close, look at Chief Véro-Paul and the Indigenous Women of Quebec's statements, because I will repeat what they said. They say only by including these amendments, the Senate's amendments, and providing communities with the necessary resources, will Canada be able to put an end, once and for all, to policies of legal assimilation and fulfill its commitments to human rights and reconciliation. And I was saying, this is Mr. Véro-Paul, Chief Véro-Paul, because First Nations have the inherent right to define their own people, urge all members of Parliament to come together to dismantle the colonial scaffolding of the Indian Act. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would say that the Bloc Québécois is, of course, in favor of stopping all systemic colonial practices on the part of the federal government, because only we can decide about our own identities. Questions and comments?
The Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This legislation, as proposed, will affect many of the constituents in which I represent, so I know that there's a fairly keen interest in the subject matter. But I also know and recognize that this is something that has to and must be Indigenous-led. I really appreciated the introduction by our minister earlier this morning. I think she brings a very strong personal touch to the issue. The question I have for the member opposite is, would she not concur, given the very nature of the subject matter, that we should be going out of our way to ensure that we have that feedback from the community or Indigenous people in general. And that's why it's important that it have that committee stage process.
The Honourable Member for Côte-du-Nord, Nitassinan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, we're duplicating the work in the committee because at the end of the day, we will be studying the matter when we get the study before our committee, and we're already doing it. It's being done at the Senate side, and we'll be working on another study. We certainly hope that these interesting comments we're receiving will be able to be transferred for the study of this other matter, and I think First Nations agree. I'm a critic, and I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of Indigenous people, but consultations have been happening. We know what needs to happen, and the time to act is now. Questions and comments?
Reprise du débat. Resuming debate?
No. Is the House ready for the question? The question is the following. Madame Goldmasty, appuyée par Madame McKnight, propose.
Madame Goldmasty, seconded by Madame McKnight, moves that Bill S2, an act to amend the Indian Act, new registration entitlements, be now read a second time and refer to the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Call at 1:30. They're going to begin. They're seeing the clock.
Proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business, resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-221, an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, disclosure of information to victims, standing in the name of Mr. Arnold.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, l'honorable député de Jonquière.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc Québécois will be voting in favour of Bill C-221. This bill aims to better inform victims as to decisions made by the Parole Board and Correctional Services Canada. It's not revolutionary, but for victims and their loved ones, this would mean greater transparency and could answer some of the questions victims have who are often kept in the dark about decisions made regarding these offenders. All parties had supported C-320 during the last Parliament, an identical bill in a way. But as is usually the case with opposition bills, it died on the order paper in the Senate. Bill C-221 seeks to amend the Corrections and Conditional Releases Act to better inform victims about the offender's eligibility and review dates for temporary absences, external placements, parole, and statutory release. This bill is fairly brief. It amends 4 sections of the Corrections and Conditional Releases Act. These subparagraphs in the current Act already aim to inform victims about the eligibility and review dates applicable to temporary absences or parole, the date of an offender's release, the eligibility and review dates applicable to unescorted temporary absences or parole, the date of their escorted or unescorted temporary absences, parole, or statutory release. The bill would therefore simply add the requirement for the Correctional Service of Canada to explain how the dates were determined. Sections 26 and 142 of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act already provide for the disclosure of some information to the victim or loved ones upon request.
The Act would also allow victims to sign up to receive services from Correctional Services Canada or the Parole Board to obtain further information about criminals. This is the sort of here is the information that victims can obtain under paragraph 26(1)(a), the name of the offender, the offense they were found guilty of, the dates of their sentence, and eligibility and review dates for temporary absences or parole. The board can also communicate, if judges determine this will not have a negative impact on public safety, the following information: the date of an offender's release on a temporary absence, work release, or parole or statutory release, conditions tied to the offender's release or parole, and the place that the offender will be released into or working. 142(1)(a) and 142(1)(b) contain essentially the same information under the section conditional release, detention, and long-term surveillance information communication. This information already contains release and absence dates, but the information does not currently contain any information on how dates were determined. For some cases, it's very simple. For example, statutory release typically happens two-thirds into the sentence, with exceptions under legislation. As such, explaining the date would simply be to factually explain current legislation and how the date was determined. But for other cases, situations can be a little bit more complex. Take the example of someone who is jailed for life, but who is given a 1-hour temporary absence to escorted to attend his mother's funeral. There, the government would have to explain the dates and also how the dates were determined. For example, Correctional Services Canada and the Parole Board could explain that it decided the offender had been granted 45 minutes of temporary absence to attend a funeral service, and then that person would be escorted right back into prison. Explaining the grounds behind how dates were determined would hopefully assuage certain concerns being felt by victims. Victims and families currently have trouble getting answers to their questions about release and parole. And for the Bloc Québécois, it is inconceivable that victims are having trouble getting answers, especially when they're asking questions about violent criminals or killers. Victims and their loved ones already have the access to the dates that offenders are eligible for release or an assessment. So C-221 is a good thing, but it raises some questions. Will the information given to victims be succinct? After all, legislation can be difficult to understand. Will communications be tailored for a lay audience? The Bloc Québécois hopes so. We believe that the information should be appropriately communicated to victims. What is more, under current legislation and under C-221, victims would have to sign up to receive information. This means that victims would have to sign up with Correctional Services Canada or the Parole Board. They would not receive information automatically, and some victims may not be aware that they have this right. The Victim Advocacy Association of Quebec has suggested that the National Office for Victims of Criminal Acts contact victims and their loved ones as soon as a federal sentence is issued. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, we know that all parties voted in favor of Bill C-320 during the last Parliament. I don't see why we should not give Bill C-221 the same treatment. Thank you.
Please débat, and I'll member for Langley Township, Fraser Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I rise today, after I switch my glasses over, to speak about a private member's bill sponsored by my good friend and colleague, the member for Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies. It's a great piece of legislation. And it will amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act with a focus on victims. Now, it's a simple bill that will have a significant and positive impact on our justice system. But unlike other criminal bills, this one does not create a new crime or further define an existing crime. It doesn't create new penalties for something that already is illegal. And it will have no impact on people who have been convicted of a crime and who are incarcerated. But it will have a very, very big and positive impact on victims of crime. At the Standing Committee of Justice and Human Rights, when I served on that committee in the last Parliament, we conducted a study on the victims of crime. And there we learned from many victims and their families that from their perspective, Canada's criminal justice system feels more like a criminal system than a justice system. And that is because the focus is on the criminal. Are they guilty? Do we have enough evidence to convict them in a court on a balance beyond a reasonable doubt? What would be the appropriate sentence if found guilty? The appropriate release conditions, and underlying all of this, of course, is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the legal rights that everybody has to be presumed innocent. But, and that's all important stuff, nobody's arguing with that, because we do want to have a criminal justice system that is fair and balanced and in compliance with our charter. But in all of that, where are the innocent victims? Those whose lives have been upended by the terrible acts of the convicted criminal. Too often the lives of the victims are a sideshow in our criminal justice system. They need to be more front and center. We want justice, after all, not just for the criminal, not just to put people away for public safety or for punishment, but also a true sense of justice for the innocent, that they too feel that the justice system is working for them. And that is why I'm so pleased that my colleague, the member for Kamloops, Shuswap Central Rockies, had brought forward this private member's bill to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, focusing on victims. In a speech in this chamber a couple of months ago, when this bill was first introduced, he shared a personal story about how a crime committed many years ago impacted him and his family, and to this day, the impact is still felt. It never goes away. And I'm also very pleased that another colleague, the member for Oshawa, has seconded the bill. Now, she too has a connection with this piece of legislation, because it was her predecessor, Member of Parliament, our friend and former colleague Colin Carey, who had introduced a similar private member's bill in the last Parliament. It was called Bill C-320 at that time. All the parties agreed that it should go ahead, and it almost made it over the finish line. First, second, third reading here, went to the other place. First, second, went to committee, third reading. Only thing that was left to do was royal proclamation. What happened? Well, it died on the order paper when Prime Minister Trudeau prorogued Parliament early last year for the sole purpose of rescuing his faltering Liberal Party from falling over the cliff. But more on that some other day. That's not what we're talking about today. We are now here in the 45th Parliament, and again, it appears that we have all-party support for this common-sense Conservative bill that is going to have a real and positive impact on victims and their families. Now, in preparing my talking points, Mr. Speaker, for my intervention today, I took the opportunity to read speeches published in Hansard, delivered by other members of other parties. It looks like the Bloc Québécois will support it. That's great. And we know the Liberals will support it. As a matter of fact, they like the bill so much that they've adopted the substance of it and incorporated it into one of their bills, Bill C-16. 16 is a very large criminal justice bill that runs 166 pages. It's in the Justice Committee right now, undergoing a very thorough review. It may come back here, but in the meantime, we're going to keep pushing my colleague's private member's bill. Now, as an aside, Mr. Speaker, I'm feeling positive. We're seeing a lot of stealing of ideas in this Parliament. The Liberal Party adopting Conservative proposals and calling them their own, proposals that just a short while ago they were criticizing and scoffing at, but now I guess they have finally seen the light. Imitation, Mr. Speaker, imitation is the highest form of admiration. I can tell you, it feels really good to be admired by the Liberal side of the House for a change. We don't get a lot of that. So, but I don't want to make too much of this this recent and probably very temporary sense of goodwill. This is a very adversarial chamber after all. So let's just settle on this. This is good legislation. We should push it through as quickly as we can. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm well into my speech, and I realize that I haven't even said what the bill is going to do. And I can do no better than to summarize a sentence from the speech that I just referenced earlier of my friend, the member from Kamloops Shoe Shop, Central Rockies. He said this is on November 18th. Transparency and accountability are core principles of our democracy. And the bill we debate today seeks to enhance the application of these principles, specifically for the benefit of those who have been victimized by crime. Just a really good summary. So what does the bill do? Well, it seeks to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act to ensure that victims receive clear explanations about how an offender's eligibility and review dates for temporary absences, release, or parole are determined. Not only will the victims and their families be told when those dates will be, but also the rationale behind why those dates have been chosen. Because we believe that transparency and accountability are core principles of our democracy. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've heard from victims of crime that Canada's criminal justice system feels deliberately opaque. They feel left in the dark. It doesn't have to be that way. We can do better. This bill is a small step in that direction. Let's expedite this through this House and also the other place and push Canada's criminal justice system another small step towards true justice for everyone, including victims of crime. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in favour of Bill C-221. This bill would ensure that victims of criminal acts are informed of information about release and parole, as well as explanations of how the dates were determined. The Act would amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act to explain to victims how eligibility dates and review dates in respect of temporary absences, releases, or parole have been determined. The government would have to support victims of crime and their families. We believe that providing information to these victims shows transparency. And victims need to be respected throughout all steps of the corrections and conditional release process. More broadly, the proposed amendments are part of this government's approach to keep victims at the heart of our justice system. Bill C-16, a government bill, seeks to achieve the same objectives as the private member's bill we are studying today. That is, increasing the amount of information available to victims, ensuring victims receive clear explanations, ensuring victims that have their impact statements taken into account at parole board hearings and throughout the corrections process. Bill C-16, however, is not merely a repetition of this bill. It would make it so that all information provided to victims about eligibility for release and parole contain information about how the dates were determined. This would remove legal redundancies and inconsistencies. Expanding the amount of information available to victims is being considered as we seek to overhaul the criminal code in a way not seen in generations through C-16. C-16 would protect victims of conjugal violence, protect our children, and increase victims' rights. To address intimate partner violence in 16, we are proposing a number of different amendments. We will create a new offense banning coercive control behavior against intimate partners. The goal is to give the justice system the necessary tools to intervene before violence gets worse, because we understand that all too often violence stems from coercive control. As such, we will criminalize coercive control to make early interventions more possible. Early interventions from before violence intensifies against intimate partners. We define coercive control as a combination of three behaviors: violent behaviors, sexually coercive behaviors, and behaviors which could reasonably cause a victim to believe that their physical or psychological safety is at risk. We also list a non-exhaustive number of coercive behaviors drawn from the experience of survivors. Survivor testimonies will help us determine the means used by abusers to exercise coercive control. C-16 would also make it easier to prove criminal harassment. Currently, proving this requires victims to prove fears for their safety. When they explain these fears, they have to relive difficult times in their lives. As such, we are replacing this with an objective criterion. The criterion about whether a reasonable individual in similar circumstances would have feared for their safety. This is an important step forward, because the justice system would be able to prove criminal harassment without re-traumatizing victims. The definition of criminal harassment has been updated to be in line with current technologies, for example, electronic stalking. Victims have raised issues with the legislation as written, and for this reason we are updating it. C-16 also deals with certain murders, classifying them as first-degree murders. These sorts of murders are the most common form of homicide under the criminal code. Femicide committed in a context of conjugal violence would be treated as first-degree murder. This would be a major step forward, Mr. Speaker. And it would address a problem that we are dealing with in Canada, because according to Statistics Canada, women are disproportionately represented as victims of intimate partner violence. 1 in every 6 victims of homicide in Canada were killed by an intimate partner, according to the government. We cannot tolerate this sort of crime in our country, and we have to crack down on it harshly. We also take action against deepfakes. The criminal code already prevents the distribution of intimate images without consent, but currently it is possible to create sexually explicit deepfakes, and with AI it will become even easier to create fake images that look very real. When these images are distributed, it can have devastating impact on the people involved. For this reason, we want to step up to better protect victims against these emerging threats. Another issue is that the criminal code currently does not have provisions banning people from threatening the distribution of intimate images. It criminalizes the distribution itself, but it does not criminalize threatening to distribute the images. This makes it so that victims are less well protected, especially victims who are being blackmailed under the threat that intimate images will be released. We need to do better. We need to protect victims from this sort of threat, and that is what we will be doing, because these threats are unacceptable. The new measures will apply both to threats to share real images and threats to share deepfakes. We will also be... we are putting in place a more agile, more robust justice system to protect victims of criminal harassment, sexual violence, and other crimes, all while at the same time protecting our children. We will put victims first, keeping them at the heart of our justice systems. We will do so through our ambitious criminal code reform, as set out in Bill C-16. I would like to note that this reform is part of a series of bold, decisive measures being put in place by the new government.
With C14, we're going to make changes to parole conditions. And this bill has more than 80 targeted changes in the criminal code. So parole will get harder, especially for repeat offenders, and especially for serious offenses. And they will face the real consequences. This is what Canadians expect from us. We have heard their expectations, and we're taking action. C12 also aims to improve security at our borders. We have made significant changes in the workings of our border agents in terms of providing them with the equipment and the tools they need, more sophisticated tools, of course, especially to fight against fentanyl and arms trafficking. In Budget 2025, we also invested in public security to hire more RCMP agents and more CBSA agents. We invested in the prevention in terms of mental health services. So the security of our communities is something that we take very, very seriously. And I hope that we'll be able to rely on the collaboration of our opposition colleagues so that we can adopt these different bills to fight against criminality, C14, C16, and all the other pieces of legislation that we talk about in this chamber for the safety of our citizens. We understand that the safety of Canadians and the protection of victims of crime needs to go beyond partisan division lines. And on this side of the House, we understand that safe and resilient communities are the main pillar of a strong Canada. For the security and prosperity of our families and communities and businesses, we have to take these steps and put the protection of victims first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Saskatoon South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I rise today to speak to this private member's bill presented by my colleague, the member from Kamloops, Shuswap Central Rockies. It's Bill C-221, an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, disclosure of information of victims. This bill seeks to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act to ensure that victims receive clear explanations about how an offender's eligibility and review dates for temporary absences, release, and parole are determined. Every Canadian has the right to feel safe in their community, and I am proud to be a member of a party which values a justice system which serves victims of crime. So it follows that if an offender is being released, victims deserve to have an understanding of the decisions leading to the release of this offender. A transparent and accountable explanation on how the decision was reached. Mr. Speaker, this amendment to the law would ensure that victims know when offenders could be released and then provide the reasons for how officials determined those eligibility dates. The contents of this bill simply are not new. I mean, Conservatives have proposed this amendment dating back to the 42nd Parliament. It's such a sensible amendment, Mr. Speaker, that this has received widespread support from all sides of this chamber. Every one of us knows someone who has been a crime victim, unfortunately. The impacts are felt far and beyond the individual, to a family, to loved ones, and eventually to every community. Respect for victims should be the standard, not the exception. You know, in order to truly support victims, our legislation has prioritized their rights and their well-being. That means giving victims a chance to prepare themselves and understand the rationale that lead to the release of the criminal who abused or even harmed them or even one of their loved ones. This transparency has absolutely no downside at all. We have witnessed an alarming trend with this current government that all too often the rights of victims are overshadowed by the rights of offenders. That has got to change in this country. I'll give you a stat. In my city of Saskatoon, crime rates, unfortunately, are climbing. I'm going to give you a comparison from January of 2005 to January of 2006. Violent crime in my city, unfortunately, is up 13%. And property crimes right now in the city of Saskatoon are up year to year 16.5%. Over 10 years, this Liberal government has paid little or even no attention to the victims of this country. I have gone on numerous ride-alongs with police, along with paramedics in my city, and each ride-along, Mr. Speaker, brings absolutely new experiences. So many offenders are repeat offenders that police simply know the criminals by name. They pick them up on a Monday afternoon, they're released later in the day. 2 weeks ago, the release, though, of a Saskatoon man with 70, that's right, 70 prior convictions of voyeurism, indecent acts, and trespassing at night sent shockwaves through a city of over 300,000. Kyle Hamlock was rearrested just hours after being released, was found to be breaching the conditions of his release. I've received emails from constituents with brave concerns. In fact, I even had one that was victimized in my riding by Hamlock. And it is understandable she is horrified that this man was allowed out after 70. It's incredible. 70 prior convictions. Victims shouldn't have to relive their nightmares. 70 convictions, and yet he was released only to be found breaching the conditions of his release less than 24 hours later. A known offender was set free to terrorize a community all over again, and it didn't take him long to find new victims. Thankfully now he is again behind bars, and I sincerely hope that he is sentenced. His victims will one day be given the courtesy of knowing how his release was decided. A truly just system protects its own citizens. Many victims are left in the dark when it comes to parole decisions. They deserve now an explanation on how parole dates are determined. This amendment will benefit victims of crime by making the justice system in this country more transparent. Bill C-221 stands up for the rights of victims to understand exactly how parole dates and eligibility are set for offenders. I am proud to support this bill. This has been in the House previously. In fact, this is the fourth time this bill has been introduced in this place. The 42nd, the 43rd, and the 44th Parliaments, and now the Liberals are rumbling that they're going to include this bill in C-16. It is time. It's time to get this bill over the line to amend the Corrections and Constitutional Release Act to ensure that victims receive clear explanation about how an offender's eligibility and review dates are determined. This bill is just one small yet very consequential change which would demonstrate a measure of respect that victims deserve from our justice system in this country. So it's my pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to lend my total support to my colleague and his private member's bill C-221. Thank you.
Way to go, Kevin!
Resuming debate. Prise de débat. I will therefore invite the honourable member for Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies, to deliver his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to thank all members who have spoken on this bill today and those who spoke during the first hour of second reading on November 18th, 2025. Your contributions and support are sincerely appreciated. not just by me, but by all victims of crime and those that have worked on this bill. When Canadians are victimized by crime, they often carry psychological and emotional burdens for life. My private member's bill proposes common sense, realistic measures aimed at reducing the stress victims experience in dealing with the parole and release process of those who have been the release process of those who have victimized them. The legislation before us today deserves to be passed because it will deliver relief for victims of crime. It will lighten the burdens that they carry by providing them explanations of how parole and release dates have been calculated in the relation to the offenders who victimized them. Debates of this bill and previous bill that proposed the same measures have reflected how these measures are supported by victims of crime and those who support them and advocate for their rights. As I have articulated in previous debate, the proposals of this bill were brought to this Parliament by Lisa Freeman of Oshawa, Ontario. Ms. Freeman's personal experience of losing her father and spending years navigating Canada's corrections and parole systems, dealing with her father's killer, were excruciating for her. When the burden of losing her father to a violent murderer was compounded by frustrations of dealing with the government bureaucracies, Lisa resolved to advocate for legislative measures to alleviate the burdens and frustrations that victims of crime carry. I send my heartfelt thanks to Lisa Freeman. Lisa, thank you for your courage, your determination, and the hard work that has moved this legislation forward. The proposals of my private member's bill have been introduced in 4 consecutive parliaments, spanning 6.5 years, and I also thank those who have worked with Mrs. Freeman in previous parliaments to move those proposals forward. I'd like to thank the Honourable Lisa Raitt, who tabled Bill C-466 in the 42nd Parliament, Senator Boisonov, who tabled S-219 in the 43rd Parliament, and Dr. Colin Carey, who tabled C-320 he sponsored in the 44th Parliament. Thank you all for your efforts to improve Canadian law. Mr. Speaker, it is good to see that the government has formally acknowledged the merit and the necessity of my bill's proposals and included them in Government Bill C-16. These measures supporting the victims of crime need to be passed as soon as possible. Canadians count on parliamentarians to make Parliament work, and I invite all parliamentarians to join me in moving my private member's bill towards completion because the outcome of Bill C-16 remains uncertain in a minority government, and these changes are worth pursuing through all avenues possible. These measures could have and should have been passed years ago, and they were very close to being passed just over a year ago. Section 205 of Government Bill C-16 contains coordinating amendments that anticipate the possibility of my bill passing before C-16 does, and I appreciate the government side acknowledging this possibility and drafting those coordinating amendments in the event that my bill passes before the government bill does. But now is the time for us as legislators to do our part and pass these amendments to the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, the changes that Lisa Freeman and other victims of crime deserve. I ask all parliamentarians to support victims of crime across Canada by swiftly passing Bill C-221. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is as follows. Mr. Arnold, seconded by Ms. Kirkland, moved that Bill C-221, an act to amend the Corrections Conditional Release Act, disclosure of information to victims, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. If a member participating in person wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate to the chair. The honourable member for Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that the bill be passed with the support of all parties.
Is it agreed? Agreed. I therefore declare the motion carried.
Second reading of this bill. Deuxième lecture de ce projet de loi.
Accordingly, the bill stands referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. It being 1:15 p.m., the House stands adjourned until Monday, March 9th, 2026 at 11 o'clock a.m., pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1.